Hello everyone. I know you watched this video to accompany you to sleep. So if you like this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, don't forget to tell me where you are from and what time you watched this video. Let's jump straight into the story. Story 1. I don't talk about this to anyone anymore because when I did, people either thought I was lying or just sick in the head or looking for attention or delusional or traumatized, or all of those things rolled into one quiet, twitching, sleep-deprived wreck of a person. And maybe they're right, and maybe I am all of those things. But what happened to me didn't come from some hallucination or psychotic break or grief spiral, because it happened before any of that. It caused those things, and the way it all began is so small and stupid that I sometimes wish it had just stayed that way, that I had ignored the smell or the noise, or that I had just moved out of that building and left the past alone. But I didn't, and now I wake up hearing scratching even when there's no walls around me. And I know I need to start from the beginning if I'm going to get through this. If I'm going to tell you what I saw and what I felt and what I know lives under that floor. So here it is. The only version I will ever tell. The only way I can live with what happened. And maybe you'll believe me, or maybe you'll stop reading halfway through and think this is all just some fiction. But that's not my problem anymore. That stopped being my problem the night I opened the hatch. And if that doesn't make sense yet, it will. Because it always starts like this, right? With something ordinary, a sound, a smell, something shifting in the corner of your eye. And for me it was the apartment, this shitty old third floor walk-up in an almost empty building in Dorchester with stained ceilings and ancient pipes and floorboards that creaked when you breathed wrong. And I took it because it was cheap and close enough to work, and I'd just gotten dumped and needed a reset. Someplace nobody knew me, and for the first week or so everything was fine except the weird neighbor 2 doors down who never came out during the day and kept a padlock on the inside of their door, which I only noticed because once I forgot my keys and was just standing there when they cracked their door to slip a package in, and I saw it hanging there like something out of a bunker. But whatever, Boston's full of weirdos. And it wasn't until that Friday night that I heard it for the first time, this dry scratching sound under my bed, not in the walls, not mice in the kitchen scratching, I mean under the bed, like something dragging nails across raw wood. And it stopped the second I turned on the lights. Nothing there, just dust and a sock. But I didn't sleep much, and I chalked it up to anxiety or a dream, or maybe I was grinding my teeth or something. Except the next night it happened again, louder this time, and when I shone my phone flashlight underneath there was nothing. But the scratch marks were new. I swear they were new. Little thin gouges in the wood slats of the floor like something sharp was crawling underneath and trying to get out. And I know what you're thinking. Why not just leave, right? Why not just move? Why not call the landlord or animal control or an exorcist or whatever? And I did. I called the landlord and he brushed it off. Said that building settles weird, which is code for don't bother me. And then I called pest control and they came and looked around and said no droppings, no chew marks, no signs of infestation, just some scratches that they said could be old. And I knew they weren't, because every night they multiplied. Not just under the bed anymore, but in the hallway, the living room, the bathroom, all tiny and fresh and always deeper than the last. And the noise, that awful noise, got bolder too, like it was learning, like it was watching me to see what made me jump, what made me check. And the worst part was that the more I acknowledged it, the more real it became, like the act of hearing and looking and worrying was feeding it, giving it room to grow. And I told myself I was imagining things, but then I started seeing shadows in the corners. Not human-shaped. Exactly, but wrong-shaped. Wrong in a way that made my skin tighten just looking at them. And they'd flinch away the second I turned my head, but never fast enough for me to miss the fact that they were there. And by the 3rd week I wasn't sleeping at all. Just lying awake at night while it scraped and scratched and breathed under the floorboards. And I mean that literally. I heard it breathing. Shallow and wet, like something trying to hold still but failing, and I started seeing other things. 2 messages, I guess, little bits of words etched into the dust on my windowsill or carved faintly into the paint on the back of the bathroom door. Things like beneath and IT remembers and one time just food. And that was the night I decided to find the source once and for all, to rip open whatever panel I had to, and see if there was a raccoon or a dying dog or anything down there, because I couldn't live with it anymore, and that's how I found the hatch. This rotted square of wood under the hallway rug near the linen closet that didn't match the rest of the floor, and when I pulled it up there was a narrow crawl space and a ladder, and this choking rush of air that smelled like hot pennies and wet dirt and rotting teeth, and even then, I could have called someone. Could have taken pictures and left, but I didn't. I climbed down. I don't know why. I couldn't stop myself. It was like something in me wanted to go, like I was being called, and the moment my foot hit the bottom I knew I'd made a mistake because it wasn't a crawl space down there. It was a tunnel, tight and black and too neat, like it had been dug deliberately, and the walls were lined with something soft and pulpy, not wood, not stone, and the air buzzed with this low, vibrating sound like a mouth humming underwater, and I moved forward anyway because by then it didn't matter. I wasn't in control anymore. I was just meat on a track. And after maybe 20 steps, the tunnel opened into a chamber, and I swear to you, I swear to God, it was full of bodies, but not dead ones, not exactly. They were alive in a way I can't describe, twitching and fused to the walls and ceiling like they'd grown there, like the tunnel had eaten them and they were still digesting. Their faces stretched and weeping and silent, and in the middle of the room was this thing, this pulsing black mass with too many limbs and one huge eye that never blinked but throbbed with veins like it was feeling me, tasting my presence, and I couldn't scream, I couldn't run, I couldn't do anything because my body had locked up and the only thing I could move were my eyes. And then it spoke, not out loud, but inside, this wet, sloshing voice that said you looked, now you belong, and I blacked out. Or maybe it let me go, I don't know, but I woke up on my hallway floor with the hatch closed and sealed over like it had never been there, and the scratches all gone and the sun was up, and for a second I thought I dreamed it, until I looked at my hands and saw they were covered in that same pulpy slime. And the worst part is that I didn't leave. I stayed. Something in me made me stay. And now, even though the scratches are gone and I don't hear it anymore, I feel it under the skin of the building. Pulsing, waiting, growing, and sometimes I find those same words scratched into my furniture. Those same shadows flinch across my mirror, and sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still see that I staring back, unblinking, and I know that one day, when I'm too tired to fight it, I'll open that hatch again and crawl back down, and I won't come back this time. And when that happens, no one will believe me, no one will even look for me, because by then I'll be part of the wall, part of the eye. And someone else will move in and hear a scratching beneath the floor. Story 2. I haven't said any of this out loud in years because no matter how many times I rehearse the words or try to explain what I saw and what I lived through, it always sounds like a lie. Like the kind of thing someone would write in a cheap horror story or claim happened to a friend of a friend of a friend online. But it wasn't someone else, and it wasn't fiction, and I'm not trying to scare you or make you believe anything you don't want to. I'm just trying to tell you what happened, because it happened to me, and it changed me, not just mentally or emotionally or whatever. I mean, it changed me in a way I can't fix, in a way I can't undo, in a way I feel in my bones every second of every day. And I know I sound insane already, but please just let me talk. Let me say it from start to finish, because if I stop or think too hard about any of it, I start hearing that sound again, that low thrum behind the silence like something breathing in reverse. And it starts to crawl up the back of my neck like fingers made of static and heat. And I can't sleep when it gets like that, and I can't eat, and I sure as hell can't be around other people, not when it's watching through my eyes. And I'll get to that part, I promise. But first, you need to understand that it started with me, or maybe with the house, or maybe with whatever was in the house before I got there. Because when I moved into that place on Maddox Hill, I wasn't looking for trouble. I wasn't chasing ghosts or trying to find something dark to fill some hole in my soul. I was just trying to get away from the noise of the world after my mother died and my job let me go, and my girlfriend moved out, and everything just stopped working at once. And the house was old and quiet and too cheap to make sense, and it sat at the end of a road with no neighbors close by, and woods that crept in too close to the windows. And it had a basement I didn't want to look at, and an attic that didn't open, and a smell that didn't leave even. After weeks of scrubbing and candles and bleach, but I didn't care because it was mine and I had nothing else left. So I settled in and pretended like the silence was healing me. Like I wasn't slowly unraveling under the weight of something that didn't have a name yet. And I could lie to myself all I wanted, but the first time I heard the whisper, I knew I had made a mistake. Because it wasn't the kind of sound that comes from pipes or drafts or animals in the walls. It was low and close and deliberate, and it said my name. Not like a question or a thought, but like a fact, like a statement. It said, "You're here now," and I should have run then. I should have grabbed my keys and gotten back in the car and never looked back. But I didn't. I told myself it was a dream or a stress response or maybe grief hallucinations, and I kept living there like I wasn't being watched. Like I didn't hear footsteps in the attic even though the hatch never opened. Like I didn't smell dirt and rot every time I stood in the hallway. Like I didn't see faces in the wallpaper when I let my eyes unfocus for too long. And every night the whisper got louder and clearer and closer until I could feel its breath on my skin when I lay in bed. Like it was inches from my ear. And I started seeing it in the corners, this shape that wasn't shaped right, long and wrong and bent, like a shadow trying to remember how to be a person, and the more I ignored it, the bolder it got. Until it didn't just stay in the shadows anymore. Until I saw it standing in the mirror behind me one morning brushing my teeth. Until I heard it breathing inside the walls, and then the dream started, or visions or memories or whatever they were, I don't know. I just know I'd wake up in the middle of the woods with my feet bare and bleeding, and no memory of how I got there. And sometimes I'd be holding things, wet things, things that didn't belong to me, things that moved even after I dropped them, and I started finding symbols carved into the trees around the house, matching symbols scratched into my arms, into my chest while I slept, and the smell in the house changed. It wasn't just rot anymore. It was like ozone and iron and static, and the walls got soft, like meat. And I know how that sounds, but I swear I could push on them, and they'd move and squish and breathe. And the lights started going out every night at the same time, 3:03, and every time they did I heard something coming up from the basement. Something wet, something big, dragging itself up the steps and stopping just short of my bedroom door. And the door would rattle like it was laughing, and the whisper would say, "Almost," and I would lie there paralyzed until the sun came up and the door stopped moving. And I got used to it, somehow, because that's what the house wanted. It wanted me to accept it, to let it in. And eventually I did, not on purpose, not like a ritual or some deal with the devil or anything. I just broke. I stopped fighting. I stopped running. I just let it all in. In the moment I did, I felt it climb inside me, not just in my head, but in my skin, in my bones, and behind my eyes. And I started saying things I didn't understand, in languages I've never heard, and writing symbols in my sleep. And people started seeing it around me, people I didn't even know. Cashiers and mailmen and delivery drivers would flinch and ask who else was in the house, even when I was alone. And eventually they stopped coming altogether. And then animals started dying on the porch, twisted into shapes that don't make sense. And the power cut out for good, and the trees around the house grew together so tightly I couldn't drive out even if I tried. And I did try. I tried once. Just once. And the car turned itself off and wouldn't start again. And when I looked back at the house, it was closer, like it had moved, like it had followed me. And when I finally got back inside, it was waiting. The thing, the shape, the voice. And this time it didn't whisper. This time it screamed. This sound like 1,000 children crying through broken radios. And I passed out, and when I woke up there were marks all over the walls, spirals, and eyes and mouths. And the furniture was gone, and the floor was wet and breathing. And I knew I wasn't going to leave. Not really. Not ever. Because I was part of it now. I had let it graft itself to me. And it showed me things. Terrible things. Things that haven't happened yet. And when I tried to leave again, on foot this time, the road just circled back to the house, no matter which direction I walked. And I started getting sick, bleeding from places that don't bleed, losing time, hearing things inside me moving when I swallowed. And I see it now, all the time, not just the shadow, but its shape, its real shape. And it's tall and endless and filled with eyes and teeth, and it lives in the between walls, between thoughts, between me, and I know what it wants now. It wants out, and it's using me to learn how to move in this world, how to wear a face, how to pass as human, and I think it's almost there. I think soon it won't need me anymore, and when that happens I don't know what I'll become, maybe nothing. Maybe just a stain on the floor, or a face in the wall, or a whisper someone else hears in a different house 1,000 miles from here. And that's why I'm telling you this now, because if you ever feel a silence that's too thick, or see a shadow that's too still, or hear a voice that knows your name when no one's around, don't stay. Don't ask questions. Don't try to understand. Just leave, because once it knows you see it, once it chooses you, there's no going back, and it's always hungry. Story 3. I've never told anyone this in full, not because I didn't want to, but because every time I tried, something happened. The phone cut off, the lights flickered, the person I was talking to would suddenly fall ill or disappear or just never answer me again. And I've come to accept that this thing, this story, this truth about what happened to me is not just something I carry, it's something that follows. And if I tell you, really tell you, you might carry it too, but I need to get it out of my head before it finishes whatever it started, because I know now it's been watching me since the beginning, and maybe if I speak it aloud, or write it here where someone might see it, I can pass it off like a disease, like shedding skin soaked in rot. But I doubt it, because it doesn't let go once it knows your name, and mine is still echoing down there in the basement where it first spoke it, where I first understood what kind of thing was living under the stairs in the house I inherited from. My uncle, the one nobody wanted, the one with the sealed attic and boarded up basement, and the letter he left with 2 words, "Don't open," which of course I didn't listen to, not because I was stupid, but because the house called to me. I don't know how else to say it. It pulled at me like a hook in my stomach from the second I stepped across the threshold, even though everything inside was old and dark and felt used up, like something had been living through it from the inside out, and it smelled like mildew and burnt metal, and the floorboards were soft like wetwood even though they looked dry. And at night the temperature would drop to freezing even though it was summer, and I'd hear thuds and dragging sounds above me, always above me. Even though the attic was nailed shut with iron strips and salt and thick black paint with symbols I didn't recognize then, but now see in my sleep, in my food, in the patterns of mold that grow along the walls in every apartment I've tried to escape to since. And on the 3rd night I followed the sound, barefoot in the dark, holding a kitchen knife I didn't remember picking up, and I stood under the attic hatch with my breath fogging in front of me. Not because it was cold anymore, but because the air wasn't air, it was something thicker, like smoke or dust or breath that wasn't mine. And I swear on my own name, I heard it whisper right into my left ear even though I was alone. Even though there was no one in the house with me, even though I hadn't told anyone I moved in. And it said, "Not yet," in a voice that was wrong, like it was being dragged backwards through static and syrup, and I fell down the stairs and didn't wake up until morning with a bruise shaped like a hand wrapped around my ankle. Too long and too wide to be human, and I should have left then. I know that, but the house wouldn't let me, the lock stopped working, the windows wouldn't open. My phone screen cracked in my hand while I was dialing 911 and bled. Something black and sticky down my palm, and the lights blew out one by one, and then the dream started. These horrible vivid waking dreams where I was standing in the basement with the floor open beneath me and something whispering up from the dark in a language I didn't know but understood, and every morning I'd wake up with more of those symbols carved into my walls, my floor, my skin, and sometimes I'd see myself in the mirror but not moving right, like my reflection was delayed or didn't recognize me anymore. And one night, the worst night, I found the attic hatch open, even though it was still sealed from the outside, and above it, darkness that felt like it was staring down at me, and the whisper said, "Almost ready." And then the door to the basement creaked open on its own, and I felt myself walking toward it without wanting to, like my legs weren't mine anymore, like something had plugged into my spine and was steering, and the steps down were longer than they should have been, far longer, 37 steps when the house only had a 10-step stairwell, and the walls started pulsing like they were alive and breathing with me, and then against me, and then inside me. And I remember standing at the bottom and seeing the room open into something impossible, a cavern, wide and wet and filled with statues that weren't made of stone but people, frozen in poses of agony and worship, some still moving, just barely. Twitching mouths sealed shut with wax and eyes rolled back to white. And in the center of the cavern was a shape I don't have words for. Not really, not because I forgot, but because human language doesn't work down there. It breaks apart the second it touches the truth of what I saw. And even thinking about it makes the back of my eyes burn. But it was huge and folded, like a centipede wearing skin, all ribs and mouths and arms that bent the wrong way. And it turned toward me with something like a face, a mass of shifting eyes and veins and teeth that kept melting and reforming. And I felt something crack in my mind, like a shell breaking and whatever was inside spilling out, and I heard it say, "Found you." And I woke up in my bed screaming with my mouth full of dirt and my hands torn open like I'd been digging. And I found a hole in the basement, a real one, where I'd never seen anything before, and deep in it were bones, too many bones, not animal, not human, not anything I could name, and buried in them was a mirror, old and broken, and black around the edges. And when I looked into it, I didn't see myself. I saw it, the thing, the folded thing, watching me from the other side like it had always been behind the glass, and now it knew how to look out. And I ran then, finally, out the front door that was suddenly unlocked, and down the street barefoot and covered in ash I couldn't explain. And I've been running ever since, 5 years now, never staying anywhere more than a month, and it always finds me, always shows up. Eventually in the cracks of the ceiling, in the shadows under the sink, in the ringing in my ears, in the dreams where I'm back in the basement and the mirror is closer and my reflection is smiling with its face, not mine, and I can't stop it. I can't stop what it started. I can't stop the changes, because I'm not like I used to be, not entirely human anymore, not alone in my head. And when I look in the mirror too long now, I see it standing just behind my eyes, waiting, patient, growing. Stronger with every moment I keep breathing, and someday, maybe soon, it'll push through fully and take my place, and no one will know the difference because it's learned how to wear me like a skin. And when it does, when it walks out into the world as me, it won't be looking for a home, it'll be looking for you. Story 4. I know no one is going to believe me, and I don't really care anymore, because believing it won't save you and ignoring it won't protect you either. It doesn't need faith or denial to grow. It just needs attention. And I gave it exactly that when I was 19 and working alone in the archive room at the back of the university library. A job nobody wanted because it was cold and damp and full of boxes no one had opened since the 70s. And I liked it that way, liked being forgotten in that. Dark, liked the smell of dust and paper and the way the world felt far away down there beneath the concrete floor. And I didn't notice anything strange at first, just odd catalogs, shelves misfiled, handwritten notes stuffed between pages where no one should have written anything, names crossed out in ink that bubbled like old blood. And then the books themselves started showing up, not in boxes, not on the manifests, just appearing. Always on the table I worked at, always late in the day, always warm to the touch like they'd just been held by someone who had left a second before I entered. And they were old. I mean old. Covers made of raw leather stitched with thread that felt like hair, titles carved in no language I recognized, pages that smelled sweet like fruit rotting under the sun, and sometimes they wouldn't open at all, and sometimes they wouldn't close once opened, and I read them. Not because I was curious, but because I couldn't stop myself, like the words sank into my mind even before I turned the page, like the sentences were being whispered into my ears in voices that didn't match any mouth. And the more I read, the worse the room got. The darker it became even during the day, the deeper the shadows stretched, the more I'd hear things just beyond my vision, footsteps pacing where there were no feet, breathing right behind my neck when I was alone. And the air changed too, grew heavier, thicker, like trying to breathe through someone else's mouth. And I started seeing people that weren't there, pale figures reflected in the glass of the basement doors, long-limbed silhouettes watching from the corners of the archive where the lights never reached, and always that thing I couldn't see fully but knew was there, crouching, waiting, hunched between two realities like it was wedged in the folds of time, and only I could hear its nails dragging along the edge of the now, and it got inside me slowly. I think, maybe from the moment I touched the first book, maybe from before, maybe it had always been in me, waiting for me to find it, to wake it up, but I know it got worse after the third month when I found the journal, the one bound in cracked leather with no spine, and filled with a single name written over and over and over again in tiny, precise handwriting. Mine, my full name, all the way to the middle initial, over and over for 63 pages. And the final page had a line that said, "He will take your face when you stop." Reading, and I don't know what I felt first, the panic or the certainty that it was already too late, because I stopped reading and immediately I heard it shift behind me, the scraping sound like a face being peeled from a skull, and I ran. I left everything, ran upstairs and into the snow with no coat, no bag, just terror pressing into my back, and I never went back, never told the university why, just dropped out and moved away and tried to forget, but the forgetting didn't work because it followed me, or maybe I carried it. Maybe it lives inside now, because it started again in my new apartment. Lights flickering at exactly 4:44 a.m. Books disappearing and reappearing open to pages I never remembered owning. Dreams that weren't dreams where I'm in the archive again and something is chewing on my name, syllable by syllable, and worse, the mirrors started lying, showing me rooms behind me that didn't exist, figures moving behind my shoulder when I was still, and my face. Sometimes I'd look and it wouldn't be right, wouldn't match the way I felt, like it belonged to someone else who was learning how to wear it. And the people around me noticed too, said I was quieter, said I mumbled in my sleep in languages that hurt their ears, said they saw someone standing behind me even when no one was there. And I started coughing up things, little paper scraps with symbols on them, teeth that weren't mine, slivers of fingernail with unfamiliar skin still attached, and I tried to burn them, bury them, eat them again to stop the spread, but it didn't matter because the thing wasn't in the scraps, it was in me, and it was growing, and it started taking time from me. Minutes at first, then hours, then whole days I couldn't remember, waking up in places I didn't recognize with dirt under my nails and blood in my mouth and the taste of copper and ash on my tongue. And I don't know what I was doing in those lost hours, but people around me started getting sick, started vanishing, and one girl, a cashier I talked to most mornings, was found dead in her apartment with my name written on her ceiling in something thick and brown. And I knew I had to go, had to run again. But the running got harder, the space between safe places shorter, and now the books appear wherever I go, in hotels, in strangers' houses, once inside a sealed envelope I got in the mail with no return address. And I can't not read them. I can't stop. They pull my eyes across the page, like I'm being dragged. And now I see things not just in shadows but in daylight, figures watching from the edge of roads, doorways that weren't there a second before, people with wrong faces and too many teeth smiling like they know I belong to something else now. And I do. I feel it. I feel it like a second spine growing under my skin, like a presence behind my ribs pressing against my heart, whispering my name backward, slower and slower each day. And I think it's changing me, not just mentally or emotionally, but physically, because my bones ache like they're realigning, and sometimes my reflection moves before I do, and sometimes it just watches, blinking when I don't blink, smiling when I want to cry, and I know soon it's going to come all the way through. It's going to use my face and my voice and walk out into the world, and no one will know it's not me, because I'm already barely here, already fading, already emptying out to make room, and I can feel it pushing thoughts into my brain that don't belong to me. Dreams of rooms that breathe and stairs that go down forever and shelves lined with faces instead of books. And I don't think I can stop it anymore. I think the only thing I can do is warn you. Because if you find a book you didn't remember owning, or a page open to a passage that seems to say your name, or if the lights go out at 4:44 a.m., and you hear something moving in the walls and your reflection looks a little too interested in what's behind you, don't read, don't look, Don't speak your name out loud, because once it hears you, once it knows you've seen it, it'll start writing your story too. Story 5. I never believed in anything supernatural, not ghosts, not demons, not fate or omens or whatever else people use to explain the sick twist in their lives, and maybe I was stupid for that. Or maybe it was better being stupid, because once you know something's out there, really know it, you can't unknow it, and you start to see it everywhere, in the corners of your eyes, in the way shadows fall, in the things that don't quite line up in the world anymore. And I think that's what happened to me. What keeps happening to me, not just that I saw it, but that it saw me, and it hasn't looked away since, and I can't even remember the exact moment it all started because it was subtle, almost innocent. Like the way rot starts with a single brown spot on a peach before it collapses into mush. And for me it began after I moved into that house on Bracken Lane. The one I got for almost nothing, because the owner was desperate to sell and the agent acted like I was a gift from God sent to lift some invisible curse, and yeah, I should have wondered more about that. But I needed the space, needed to get out of the city, needed quiet and somewhere cheap and alone to write and think and just be. And for a while it was perfect. This crooked old place on the edge of a dead forest with no neighbors for miles, and the kind of silence that feels like it grew up out of the earth itself. And the first thing that ever made me uneasy, the first little crack in the world, was the cellar door. Not that it was locked, but that it had 7 locks, all mismatched, all rusted shut. And above the door, scratched into the wood, was something that might have once been a name or maybe a warning. I couldn't read it fully. Just this jagged mess of letters gouged in too deep. Like whoever carved it wanted it to hurt the house. And every night I heard things behind it. Not movement exactly, more like breathing, slow and shallow. Not like a person, but like an animal that's lived too long and forgotten how to die. And I told myself it was just the old house settling, or rats, or wind coming up through the cracks in the foundation. Because what else could it be? But I kept waking at exactly 2:13 a.m. every night for a week straight, and each time the locks looked just a little looser, like something was trying them from the inside. And then one morning they were all hanging open, even though I never unlocked a single one. And the door was slightly ajar, just enough to see blackness, so complete it looked. Solid, like if I stepped through I'd snap my neck falling into it. And I didn't go down, not that day, just stood there holding my breath, waiting to hear the breathing again. But it was silent, and I slammed the door shut, relocked everything, stacked furniture in front of it like that'd do any good, and told myself it was fine. I was fine. I was just tired, overworked, stressed out, and I tried to write, to work, to function. But something in the house had shifted, like it knew I knew it was. Awake, and from then on everything felt off. Lights flickered even when I replaced the bulbs, faucets turned on in the night. The dog I adopted refused to enter the kitchen and spent every night growling at the basement door until she went missing 3 weeks in. And I found her collar by the cellar steps, soaked in something dark that smelled like rust and rot. And that's when I really started seeing it. Not with my eyes at first, but in reflections, in puddles, in windows, something long-end, crooked and moving like it was being pulled on strings, not walking but dragged. And the longer I stayed, the more I saw it, not just in the house, but in the woods outside, between the trees, in the back seat of my car's reflection when I was alone, in the mirror when I wasn't looking directly at it, just this hunched thing made of joints and teeth and 2 long limbs that bent inward like a puppet carved wrong. And I stopped sleeping, started keeping every light on, every door locked. But the locks didn't help, because it wasn't getting in. It was already here. It had always been here. And I started losing time, hours at first, then entire nights, waking up outside without shoes. Sometimes in the forest with scratches down my arms like branches had reached for me, or like something was holding me down. And I found drawings in my own hand I didn't remember making, pages filled with circles and spirals and shapes that felt wrong. Like just looking at them twisted something in the base of my skull. And then came the whispering, constant, under everything, like a second heartbeat in the walls, saying my name backwards, over and over, syllables folding in on themselves like they weren't meant for a human throat. And the power would cut at 2:13 a.m. every night without fail, and the house would go perfectly silent. not just quiet but empty, like the whole world had been swallowed and I was the last thing left breathing. And that's when I'd hear it coming up the stairs, not footsteps but dragging, a sound like wet fabric being pulled across wood. And once I saw its fingers curl around the edge of the door frame, not claws but bones, yellow and cracked, like driftwood from a dead sea, and I passed out. Not from fear, but from something heavier, like it took my mind. And I woke up in the basement, on the cold concrete, staring at the same blackness behind the cellar door, but this time I was inside it. And the door was open to the rest of the house, and the thing was standing in the kitchen wearing my face, not just copying it, but wearing it, badly stretched over its own too tall frame, grinning with a mouth that didn't match the teeth. And when it turned its head the wrong way and looked at me, I felt my own body twitch, like it had a thread through my spine and was learning how to pull it. And I ran, I got out, drove until I hit the coast and left the car and walked for hours until I found a town and told them I didn't remember who I was. And maybe that was true because I don't think I was fully me anymore. Not after that night, not after whatever it did to me. And I've been hiding since, changing names, moving constantly, staying off the grid, never sleeping more than 2 hours, never near mirrors, never near basements, because it's still out there, or in here, or both, and it wants me back. Or maybe it wants to finish what it started, because lately I've been losing time again, seeing things again, waking up with soil under my nails and that awful whisper curling through my ears like smoke. And I know one day I'll wake up and it'll be in the mirror again, wearing my face better this time, smiling, ready, and I won't be able to move because I won't be in here anymore. Just watching from wherever it locked me away, screaming inside my own head while it lives my life like a costume. Story 6. I don't know where to begin because if I start too early you'll think I'm lying, and if I start too late you won't understand how deep it goes. And if I'm being honest, I'm not even sure what counts as the beginning anymore, because time stopped behaving normally the day I opened that door, not a metaphorical one, not some poetic symbol of trauma or personal demons. I mean a real door, a physical door in the old house I inherited from an uncle I barely knew, the kind of inheritance that comes with strings and shadows and long histories no one wants to speak aloud. And when I moved in, everything seemed perfectly normal for the first few weeks. Creaky floors, drafty windows, the usual signs of an aging house, and nothing to get dramatic over until one day, while rearranging furniture in the basement, I found it. A narrow black door behind a false wall. A door I hadn't noticed in the floor plan or on any of the blueprints I'd studied when I took ownership. A door no one mentioned in any of the documents. But it was there, as real as my heartbeat, framed in stone like the rest of the foundation had been built around it. And something about it made the hair on my neck stand up. Not fear exactly, but recognition. Like it was something I'd seen before in a dream or a nightmare I'd forgotten, but my body hadn't. And I stared at it for what must have been hours before I touched the handle, which was ice cold even though the rest of the room was warm. And I hesitated, I really did, but not long enough. And when I opened it, I expected stairs or a closet or a crawl space, but all I saw was darkness so deep it looked like ink. And when I stepped through, I didn't fall or climb or move in any traditional way. I just shifted, like space itself bent around me, and I was standing somewhere else instantly. Somewhere not made for people, not made for light, not even made for time. A place that pulsed like it was alive and smelled like rot and iron and the kind of earth that's never seen the sun. And there were sounds, not voices but whispers, fragments of thoughts that didn't feel like mine but were in my head, overlapping, repeating, pushing images into my brain that weren't memories but felt more real than anything I'd lived through. And the moment I turned to run back through the door I came from, it wasn't there anymore. There was just wall, the same wet stone covered in symbols that looked like they'd been scratched by fingernails. And I started walking because what else could I do? Walking through corridors that kept changing, walls breathing in and out like lungs, floors that pulsed beneath my feet like flesh. And after what felt like days, I found another door, identical to the first, And when I opened it, I was back in my basement, except everything was wrong. The air was thick, the lights dimmer, the corners of the room seemed to stretch away like the geometry of the house had warped. And when I climbed the stairs back into the main floor, I realized it wasn't just the basement that had changed. I had changed, and I didn't notice how bad it was at first. Not until I looked in the mirror and saw my face staring back, just slightly off, like a painting that had been copied one too many times. Features still mine, but subtly distorted, and my voice sounded different too. Lower, slower, like something else was speaking through me, and my reflection didn't always move when I did. And sometimes I'd catch it watching me, not mimicking, but observing, and I told myself I was tired, hallucinating. Maybe the air in the basement was toxic. Maybe I'd been poisoned or trapped in some kind of sensory deprivation event. And I tried to go about life normally. But people noticed. My neighbors stopped waving. My coworkers said I was acting cold, like I'd forgotten how to be human, like I was rehearsing emotions I didn't understand. And the longer I stayed in that house, the worse it got. The more dreams I had of rooms that pulsed and doors that opened into versions of my house that weren't mine. Wallpaper the wrong color, photos I didn't take, a family I never had smiling at me with black eyes. And the more I woke up in places I didn't remember going to sleep in, floors instead of beds, closets instead of couches, and then came the gaps, the time losses, the moments I'd look at the clock and find whole hours gone, the smell of soil under my fingernails, my clothes wet with something that wasn't water, and worst of all, the notes, the ones I started finding in my own handwriting in drawers, and behind paintings, and inside books I hadn't opened, each one addressed to me in my voice, but full of warnings like don't open it again, or it sees you more clearly now, or it remembers the door you came through. And I tried to leave. I did. I packed a bag and drove until I was out of state, and rented a motel, but I woke up back in the house the next morning with the bag still packed by the door. And the timestamp on my phone showed it was the same day I left, like I'd never gone anywhere, like the house or the door or whatever was in that space was pulling me back, bending reality like gravity. And I started researching, digging through my uncle's records, the ones he'd hidden, and I found journals, pages full of symbols and drawings of things that didn't have names, sketches of the door, of me, of the house from angles that shouldn't exist. And I found a line that said it wants a face, not a soul, and I still don't understand what that means, but I think it's using mine. I think it's wearing it better every day, because now I can't always remember what I did yesterday, and my voice on recordings doesn't sound like me anymore. And when I walk past mirrors, they lag behind for a split second, and I swear something in them is smiling after I stop. And I've stopped sleeping because the dreams are too loud, filled with the sound of that place breathing and wet voices saying my name in reverse, and I don't think I'm supposed to leave. I think the door marked me, rewrote something inside me, because animals avoid me now, babies cry when I walk by, and electronic devices glitch when I touch them. And the last time I tried to tell someone in person, I blacked out mid-sentence and woke up in the cellar again with the door wide open and my own handwriting on the wall and blood that read you opened it too wide. And now I can feel it even when I'm not in the house, like a heat behind my eyes, a pressure behind every thought, like something is riding me, seeing through me, learning how to be more like me, and I don't know how long I have until it fully takes over, until I'm the shadow and it's the body. But I'm writing this here because I need someone to know, to understand, to maybe stop it or close it, or at least burn that house to the ground before it opens again. Because the last note I found this morning said the door is no longer where you left it, and I can feel it watching me from the corners of every room. Now, bending light and space and memory and self. And if I lose control and something comes wearing my face and using my voice and calling itself by my name, please, for the love of anything still sacred, do not let it inside. Do not let it smile. And whatever you do, do not let it open another door. Story 7. I never used to believe in curses or possession or any of that late-night horror show nonsense, but now I live every second with the knowledge that something I can't name lies inside me. And I don't mean that metaphorically like a secret or a regret or even a mental illness. I mean it literally, physically, like a passenger curled up just beneath my skin, something with thoughts and intentions separate from mine, and I know how insane that sounds. I would have laughed at myself a year ago, would have rolled my eyes and chalked it up to stress or grief or paranoia, but that was before the cabin. Before the night, I decided to take a solo trip to the woods to clear my head after my sister died in that crash, a crash no one could explain, no tire marks, no skid, just her car crumpled around a tree like it had swerved for something invisible, and I thought going up to the mountains where we used to hike as kids would bring me some kind of peace or closure or whatever word people like to use to pretend they're healing. But instead I found the place that broke me open, that invited it in, that gave it a name I can't say out loud because it hurts when I try. Not like a memory, but like a sound that crushes the air in your lungs. And the first night in the cabin was fine, cold but quiet, just trees outside and a fire inside and enough alcohol to keep me numb. But on the second night, I found the door in the floor, a trapdoor I swear wasn't there before, old wood with iron hinges, and a symbol carved into the middle like a spiral made of teeth. And I should have left right then, but I was drunk and angry and empty. So I opened it and climbed down the ladder into a space that shouldn't have existed, a crawl space, but too tall, too wide, too dark. And something down there moved like liquid across stone, and the air tasted like mold and ash and copper, and I felt something wrap around my ankle, but when I looked there was nothing there, just a sensation of being claimed. Tagged like prey, and I ran back up the ladder, slammed the trapdoor shut, and told myself it was just panic, just my brain playing tricks on me. But that night I dreamed of a long hallway lined with mirrors that didn't reflect me but something near me, something taller, leaner, made of shadows and bone. And when I woke up my hands were covered in soil and my boots were soaked with creek water even though I hadn't left the cabin. And over the next few days the noises started, tapping on the windows at 3:33 a.m., whispering in the chimney like wind curling into syllables, and once I saw something in the trees with no eyes, but it still looked at me, and I left the cabin the next day, packed up and drove back to the city like a coward, like a rational person trying to outrun a nightmare. But I brought it with me, whatever was in that crawl space, because I started blacking out, losing hours, then days, waking up with bruises and splinters and the taste of dirt in my mouth, and my phone began recording things while I slept, audio files of my own voice speaking in languages I don't know, sometimes overlapping with another voice, deeper, hoarser, like something trying to learn how to speak through me, and I went to doctors, therapists, neurologists. Had every test you can name, but they all came back clean, and everyone just looked at me with pity or suspicion until I stopped talking about it, stopped sharing anything, and tried to act normal while this thing inside me grew. Stronger, more confident, taking more time, more control, and I started catching glimpses of myself doing things I didn't remember, buying raw meat from butcher shops and burying it in the backyard, carving shapes into the wood of my walls with my own nails, laughing at nothing in the middle of the night, and I installed cameras to try to catch it, to see what I did when I lost time. But every time the footage cut out, static pouring in just before the blackout, then hours of empty recordings. Until I reappeared, staring into the lens with a smile I don't know how to make, too wide, too toothy, and sometimes there's something standing just behind me, blurry, humanoid, twitching like stop-motion film, and I've tried everything to stop it. Fasting, prayer, therapy, medication, even exorcism, though I don't believe in that stuff. And every attempt just makes it angrier, more present, and now I can feel it constantly, like a second heartbeat in my spine, like pressure behind my teeth. And I don't sleep anymore because when I do it walks around in me, wearing me like a costume, saying things to people I don't know, making phone calls to numbers I've never dialed, visiting places I've never been and leaving traces behind, receipts, photos, emails I don't remember writing, and my friends don't believe me. They say I've changed, but they think it's grief or trauma, and maybe that's true. Maybe that's how it got in. Maybe it needed a crack to slip through, and my sister's death was just the beginning, the offering. Because sometimes I dream of her standing in that hallway of mirrors, and she doesn't have eyes either, just black holes weeping smoke. And she opens her mouth and nothing comes out but that same spiral carved into her tongue. It's spinning and spinning until I wake up gagging on blood. And the doctors say I have ulcers, but I know better. I know it's carving itself into me, leaving marks no skin can see. And the worst part is I think it's using me for something. Like, I'm a vessel or a scout or a doorway, and every time it takes over, every time I disappear, it stays a little longer, gets a little better at being me. And I'm terrified that one day I won't come back. That it'll wake up in my skin and walk away, and I'll just be trapped behind my own eyes watching it live my life, hurt the people I love, open doors no one should open, and I've thought about ending it. I've come close, really close, but every time I try something stops me. Not fear, not doubt. Just this overwhelming presence like a weight pressing down on my limbs whispering not yet. And I think that's the only reason I'm still alive, not because it wants me to be, but because it's not finished with me, and maybe it never will be. Maybe this is what I am now, a house for something ancient and hungry and clever, something that wears people like clothes and walks unnoticed among crowds. And I don't know how many others there are, how many doors were opened in forests or basements or deserts or caves, how many people smile and talk and breathe just like everyone else but aren't human anymore. Just echoes stuffed with bone and blood and darkness. But I think we're everywhere, hiding in plain sight, waiting for the moment when the doors open again all at once and we step through together, a wave of familiar faces with unfamiliar souls. And when that day comes, you won't be able to tell who's still real, who's still themselves. Because we'll look like your neighbors and your teachers and your lovers and your friends. But if you look closely, really closely, you'll see it in the eyes, a shimmer like oil on water, a flicker behind the pupils, and by then it'll be too late because we'll already be inside, smiling your smile, thinking your thoughts, wearing your life like a second skin. Story 8. I haven't spoken to anyone in almost 13 months because every time I open my mouth something else tries to come out, not a scream or a word, but a sound that doesn't belong to this world. A vibration that twists the air and makes glass shiver and shadows move against the walls. And I know how that sounds. I know it sounds like madness or grief or trauma pushing through the cracks in my sanity. But I promise you, I was normal before the quarry. Before the drowning that didn't happen and the voice that came after. And if you give me the time, if you can read this before they find me, I'll tell you what really happened that night, and maybe you'll believe me, and maybe you'll know what to do with the thing I've become, because I sure as hell don't. Not after everything. Not after watching myself in the mirror blink out of sync with my own face. And it started, all of it, on a night like any other when we were drinking down by the old quarry like we always did. Me and Logan and Danny. And Chris, passing a bottle around, throwing rocks into the black water and pretending like we weren't all broken in ways none of us could admit. And it was Logan who said we should swim, even though the water was ice cold and the sky was already turning. Even though we'd all heard the stories about that place, how it wasn't just deep but bottomless, like it didn't lead to the Earth's core but somewhere else entirely, a hole punched in the skin of reality. But we laughed and stripped and dove in, one by one, until the four of us were treading water in a circle under the stars, laughing and splashing and pretending everything was okay. And I remember going under just once, holding my breath and sinking down to scare Danny, who always flinched at the idea of being grabbed from below. But when I sank that time, I felt something pull me deeper, not like a current, but like fingers around my ankles, cold and long and knowing. And when I opened my eyes, the water wasn't dark anymore. It was full of light, shifting green and blue and red like oil over fire, and I saw something beneath me, something that should not have been there, a shape too big and too still and too awake, and then I was back at the surface, choking and gasping and clawing at the rocks to get out, and no one had seen me go under, no one had seen anything strange, just me shaking and pale and saying we had to leave, and they laughed, but they left with me, mostly to shut me up, and I thought that was it, just a scare, a hallucination, Maybe the alcohol or the cold playing tricks on my body. But that night, when I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I heard it, not outside but inside, a voice that wasn't made of sound but thought. A pressure against my skull that said my name in a way I've never heard anyone say it, like it owned me, like it was remembering me from a long, long time ago. And I couldn't sleep after that, not because I was afraid, but because I was being watched. Felt it in the walls, in the silence, like something on the other side of the mirror was leaning forward and breathing against the glass. And I started seeing things, shadows where there was no light, reflections that moved on their own, animals that stared too long and didn't blink. And I told myself it was anxiety, stress, maybe some latent trauma cracking open under the weight of the world. But then I started losing time, waking up in different places, sometimes outside, barefoot in the woods with mud between my toes and blood under my fingernails. And I stopped going to work, stopped answering my phone, stopped seeing anyone, because I couldn't trust myself not to hurt them. And it got worse when I tried to fight it. When I tried to exorcise it with rituals I found online or herbs from shops that smelled like mildew and incense and desperation. And every time I resisted, it dug deeper, burned symbols into my dreams, made the walls of my apartment bleed ink that vanished before anyone else could see it. And I haven't slept in a bed in months because when I lie down it climbs into me, coils around my ribs and whispers in a tongue that rattles my teeth. And I've tried to record it. Tried to catch it on video or audio, but all I get is static and shrieks too high-pitched for human ears. And my neighbors have complained about the noises, said they hear chanting or crying or something like a child humming through the vents. But when they knock, I don't answer. Can't answer, because the last time I almost reached out and grabbed someone by the throat with a hand that wasn't mine, fingers too long and too thin, and bones popping under the skin like something was wearing me wrong. And I see myself now, in reflections and in dreams, and it's not me. It's not even close. My eyes are black when I'm not looking. My smile is wide when I'm trying to frown, and sometimes I wake up with ancient words carved into my chest, perfectly symmetrical, no blood, just welts that glow under certain lights, and I've done everything I can to stop it. Salt and iron and circles of ash. Even tried drowning myself in the bathtub hoping that maybe I could close the loop, send whatever it is back to the pit it came from, but it wouldn't let me. Made my limbs go limp and my lungs freeze, and when I finally clawed my way back to the surface, I swear I wasn't alone in the water. Saw eyes under the foam, mouths open and singing, and I know now that it came from that quarry, that night, that moment I sank too far and looked too deep, and it saw me and chose me. And it's not just inside me, it's learning through me, using my memories, my body, my voice, practicing humanity like a costume it's still tailoring, and one day it won't need me at all. One day I'll be the passenger and it'll be the one steering. And when that day comes, no one will notice the difference because it's already so good at pretending, already so perfect at smiling and speaking and saying the right things. And maybe that's the worst part, that I can feel it getting better, growing stronger, stretching its influence further than me, infecting electronics, writing itself into code and light and sound. And maybe I was just the first crack, the first vessel, the first drowned boy to come back wrong. But I won't be the last, because I feel it now, calling others, humming beneath the city like sonar, summoning those who are broken, who are vulnerable, who are ready to be rewritten. And it's not just a voice anymore. It's a song, and it's spreading. And if you've read this far, you've heard it too, haven't you? That strange pressure in the back of your skull, that flicker in the mirror that doesn't quite match your movement. That dream of deep water and eyes in the dark and something beneath you waiting for the moment you stop swimming. And maybe that's how it spreads now. Not through blood or touch, but story, through the telling, the remembering, the acknowledgement. And if you've made it to the end then, it's already inside you too, humming softly, waiting patiently, and when the time comes for you to choose whether to sink or surface, I hope you remember what I told you. I hope you don't open your mouth, because once you let it speak, it never stops. Story 9. I used to think the worst thing in life was being alone, but now I know it's being followed by something you can't explain, something that doesn't breathe or sleep or speak, but still watches, still listens, still learns. and I can tell you exactly when it started. The moment the shift happened, the night I saw something I was never supposed to see, when I was working late alone in the records basement of the old courthouse where I'd been hired to digitize paper files for a government department that no longer existed. A job so dull and isolating most people quit in weeks, but I liked it because no one talked to me, no one asked questions. And that meant I didn't have to lie about how empty everything felt since my brother disappeared 2 years ago without a trace. And it was just another Thursday when I found the box with no label, tucked behind a rusted filing cabinet that scraped across the concrete when I moved it, revealing a shallow cavity in the wall filled with cold air and cobwebs, and that box, old and heavy and sealed with twine that snapped like dry roots when I pulled, and inside were photographs, black and white and decades old, all showing the same house from different angles, a tall, narrow thing at the edge of a forest, windows like eyes, roof like a crooked crown, always with something standing in the shadows nearby, never clear, never in focus, just the suggestion of a figure. And I should have just logged it, should have filed it and moved on. But I felt something when I touched the photos, like a static charge through my fingertips and a sudden cold that didn't come from the room. And I took one photo home, just one, planning to scan it, thinking maybe I'd stumbled on something historical or valuable. But that night I dreamed of the house, of standing in front of it barefoot with blood in my mouth. And when I woke up, the photo was gone, the frame on my desk cracked from the inside, and my bedroom window open even though I never opened it. And I told myself I was sleepwalking again, something I used to do as a child but hadn't done since I was 10. But it kept happening, dreams of the house, always the same angle, always a little closer, and things in my apartment moved during the night. Small things at first, keys gone missing, lights flickering, whispers in the hallway just after I turned off the TV, but then it escalated. My reflection began to linger a half second too long, mirroring movements I hadn't made, and one night I saw the figure from the photos standing at the end of my hallway, just the silhouette of a man, but impossibly tall, head bent sideways like he couldn't fit upright. And I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, just watched as he stepped backward into the dark and vanished. And the next day the photograph was back on my desk, wet and curling at the edges like it had been submerged, and the house in the image had changed. The front door was open now, and the trees looked closer, denser, and I realized it was pulling me in, not metaphorically but literally, like each dream brought me physically closer to that place. And every night, I'd wake up with soil under my nails and scratches on my legs and the taste of rot in my throat. And I started seeing him everywhere, in crowds, in reflections, behind trees, just standing and watching, always watching. And I stopped sleeping, stopped going outside. But it didn't matter because the house was already inside me, or I was inside it, or both. And then I started hearing my brother's voice, calling from other rooms, calling from behind doors I'd never seen in my apartment before, begging me not to follow, telling me it wasn't really him, not anymore. And I think that's when I finally understood that the house is a place between, a membrane between worlds, and the figure is its guardian or its prisoner or maybe its bait. And my brother must have found it before me, maybe by accident, maybe on purpose, maybe it calls to people who've lost too much. And the more I looked at the photo, the more the house changed. New windows appeared, shutters vanished, the grass grew darker, and I knew with a horrible certainty that once the house became fully visible, once it revealed itself entirely in the photo, I'd be inside it, permanently, body and soul, and no one would ever find me, just like my brother. And I tried to destroy the photo, tried to burn it, shred it, bury it, but it always came back, always wet, always humming. And every time I blacked out, I'd find myself closer to woods, trees in the distance growing sharper, the horizon changing, and one morning I woke up with leaves in my mouth and dirt packed under my eyelids, and I went back to the courthouse, desperate, searching for the original box. But the wall was solid again, no cavity, no cabinet, no record of any file that matched what I'd found, and I even tried tracking the house itself, showing the photo to archivists and historians and realtors, but no one recognized it. No one had ever seen it before, and yet when I posted it online, dozens of people said they dreamed about it, had seen it in sleep or in the corner of their eye or in childhood memories they were told to forget. And it's spreading. I can feel it. Like a web pulling more people into its reach. And I haven't been to work in weeks. I haven't spoken to anyone because I'm afraid of what I might say or what might speak through me. And I can't look at the photo anymore because now there's someone in. The open doorway, small and hunched and crawling on all fours, and every time I blink it's a little closer to the camera, to me. And I know the next time I sleep I'll be on the threshold. My foot will cross the rotting boards. And I won't be able to stop myself because that's the trick. That's how it works. It makes you want it, makes you need it. Like you've spent your whole life waiting to step into its mouth and let it close behind you. And the last time I heard my brother, he was behind the walls of the house, whispering in a voice that was too thin and too dry, saying the house doesn't let you die. It just uses you, like furniture or insulation or noise, and you fade, piece by piece, until there's nothing left but the echo. And maybe I've already passed the threshold. Maybe this is just what it feels like to be absorbed, to be used, to be part of something older and crueler than the world. And I know now I should have never opened that box, should have never touched that photo, should have never looked at the house. Because once you see it, it sees you, and once it sees you, it never forgets. Story 10. I used to believe the strangest thing that ever happened to me was the night I saw my father die, and then watched him walk back into the house 10 minutes later pretending nothing had happened. But I've come to understand that the horror didn't begin or end with that moment, that it was only the first break in the thin skin between my world and something that wants in, something that watches through mirrors and speaks in the silence between breaths. And I've tried to tell people, tried to find the words to explain what it's like to know that your reflection isn't always yours, that sometimes it's them watching you. And when I was 13, I saw my father fall from the roof, trying to fix a leak during a storm, and I saw the way his body landed, saw the angle of his neck, saw the way his mouth hung open like a puppet whose strings were cut, and I screamed. I ran down the stairs to the yard, but when I got outside, the body was gone. Nothing but a dent in the grass. And then I heard the front door open, and there he was, soaking wet, smiling too wide, saying he'd just gone out to check something. And when I asked him about the fall, when I told him what I'd seen, his smile dropped, and he knelt down and grabbed my shoulders and said, "You didn't see that, you understand? You didn't see me." And that night I couldn't sleep because I could hear him pacing outside my bedroom door, whispering words I couldn't understand in a voice too low and broken to belong to a living man. And from that night forward, I never fully trusted the people around me. Not my mother, who started humming songs in her sleep in a language no one taught her. Not my friends, who began forgetting small things like the name of the street they lived on or the color of their own rooms. And not myself, because I began to lose time. Minutes and then hours and then entire days vanishing into static and confusion, waking up in strange places with scratches down my back and whispers echoing in my ears like I'd been underwater with someone else breathing beside me. And I stopped looking in mirrors because every once in a while my reflection didn't move when I did, just stared back with a look of pity and hunger and something that shimmered like joy just beneath the surface. And I know how this sounds. I know you think I'm lying or broken or insane, but I swear to you I remember everything. The first time the sky blinked, the time the moon looked wrong, flat like a sticker on black glass, and the way the house creaked even when no one walked its floors. And I tried to get help. I went to a therapist who looked at me like he'd heard it all before, but when I told him about the voices in the walls, he just nodded and said, "You too," and then excused himself and never came back into the room. And the next time I went, the building was closed and empty and boarded up, and I still don't know if it ever really existed. And I started noticing the glitches, the way people would freeze mid-step, their mouths twitching open and shut like they were buffering, the way birds would hover in place too long, or how sometimes I'd see myself out of the corner of my eye walking in the other direction, wearing something I didn't own. And I think the thing in my father that night didn't just come for him. It came for all of us. because one morning I woke up and the house was too quiet. And when I opened the door, all the furniture was gone. The windows bricked over from the inside. And my parents were standing in the kitchen staring at nothing, mouths moving, but no sound coming out. And when I screamed, they turned in perfect unison, smiled at me with their eyes still blank, and said, "You're almost ready." And then just stood there, waiting, not moving, not blinking. And I ran. For hours, and the streets stretched longer than they should have. Intersections repeating, houses rearranging themselves. And I realized I wasn't in my town anymore. I was in something that looked like it but wasn't. And the sky flickered like a dying light bulb. And when I finally made it to what should have been my friend Eli's house, I found a letter on the door in my own handwriting that said, "Don't trust him." And when I went inside, Eli was sitting at the table with his head turned, completely around like it was nothing, smiling at me with eyes that didn't blink. And he said, "We've been waiting for you." And I blacked out. Woke up 3 days later in my own bed with dirt in my mouth and my fingernails torn and something sewn into my skin in the shape of a circle with teeth. And now it's always with me, a hum beneath my thoughts, a presence behind my eyes. And I've seen the others, the ones like me, the ones who remember what they shouldn't, who flinch when the world resets, who bleed when they dream. And we meet sometimes in forgotten alleys or basements that weren't there yesterday. And we don't speak because the things that watch us can hear through words, but we draw symbols in ash and salt, and we try to anchor ourselves in this place, in this version of the world. But it's getting harder. The cracks are wider, the voice is louder, and sometimes I wake up mid-sentence in a room I've never seen, surrounded by people I almost recognize saying things like, "We're losing him," and "He's almost crossed over." And then I'm back in my body screaming with blood pouring from my nose and static blaring in my ears. And I've started writing everything down, mapping the places that flicker, tracking the patterns in the shadows, listening to the hum in electronics that isn't interference, but language. And I think they're trying to merge the worlds to bring something through that doesn't belong. Something that wears faces and memories like masks, and maybe they already have. Maybe I'm not the first. Maybe I'm just the first one who noticed. And if you're reading this and any of it sounds familiar, if you've ever seen a loved one move in a way that wasn't quite right, or heard your name whispered from an unplugged radio, or found a photograph of yourself you don't remember taking in a place you've never been, then it's already started for you too. And you need to be careful. You need to never answer a knock at your door after midnight. Never step into a reflection that seems deeper than it should be. And never ever go back to the house where something terrible happened, because it's not a memory, it's a hole. And once it opens, it doesn't close. And once you fall in, you don't come back out the same. Story 11. I thought I knew what fear was until I started hearing the whispers. It was the middle of the night. I had been living in my apartment for over a year, a small, quiet place on the top floor of an old building that had a history, or at least that's what I told myself whenever I felt the weird twinge in the air, like the house itself was alive, breathing with me. And I dismissed it for months. The little things, the creak of the floorboards when I was sure I was alone, the way shadows moved, when there was no light to cast them. But it wasn't until that night that it all began to unravel, and it started with a knock at the door, or at least that's what I thought it was, a loud, sharp knock like someone wanted in. And when I opened the door, there was no one there, just the empty hall stretching endlessly in both directions, the kind of long, cavernous hallway you get in older buildings where everything echoes even though it shouldn't. And at first, I thought maybe I was just tired, that my mind had played tricks on me, but that wasn't the worst part. No, the worst part was that the knocking didn't stop. It kept going, soft at first, just a faint tap that I could hear even through the walls, but it grew louder, more insistent, as if whoever was knocking was getting closer. And at some point, I couldn't tell if it was the door or my own pulse that was thumping in my ears. And that's when I started seeing things, flashes, like glimpses of a face just around the corner of my eye, a shape that was too tall, too thin, too wrong to be human. And I'd turn fast, but nothing would be there, just the same empty hallway. And when I tried to sleep, That's when it got worse. It was like being watched every time I closed my eyes. Like there were eyes just behind me, breathing too close, and I would wake up with scratches on my arms, deep gouges like something had clawed at me in my sleep. But when I looked in the mirror, there was nothing there, no marks on my skin, nothing out of place, and I tried to explain it away. I thought maybe it was the stress from work or lack of sleep, but it didn't stop. The whispers, the feeling that I wasn't alone, and one night, I heard something different, a voice, low and guttural, almost like it was coming from beneath the floorboards, and at first, I thought it was my imagination, but then it spoke my name, and I froze. I could feel my heart stop for a second, because no one had ever been in my apartment except for me. I hadn't told anyone where I lived, no one knew anything about me, and when I looked down at the floor, the words kept coming, slow and steady, "Come to me, I am waiting," and that's when I knew. I had to leave. There was no choice. The house was calling me. And so I packed a bag as fast as I could. But when I went to leave, the door wouldn't open. It was like the handle was stuck, locked from the outside. And I turned it, twisted it with all my strength, but nothing happened. And when I looked out the window, the city below had changed. The streets weren't the same. The buildings looked warped, crooked, like they were leaning toward me. And I was trapped in that apartment with the whispers getting louder, the voice growing clearer, closer, and then I saw it. The shadow at the end of the hallway, so tall it almost scraped the ceiling, and it was moving toward me, slow at first, but each step it took seemed to echo inside my skull, and I backed away, slowly, until I was pressed against the wall, and it was then that I saw the door, the one at the far end of the hall, the one I'd never noticed before, the one that wasn't supposed to be there. And before I could stop myself, I was walking toward it, my legs moving against my will. And when I reached the door, it opened on its own, and I stepped through into another room. Only this room wasn't a part of my apartment. It was dark, like a basement, with stone walls and dirt floors, and the air smelled of rot, like something had died in here long ago. And then I saw it, the thing that had been following me, the thing that had been whispering my name. And it wasn't human, not really, but it wore a face, my face, twisted and warped, like it had been stretched too thin. And its eyes were black, black as the void, and when it smiled, I saw its teeth, sharp and long, like a predator's, and it stepped forward, and I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move, I couldn't speak. I was paralyzed, and it reached for me, and I could feel its cold hand brushing against my arm, and I knew then, it wasn't trying to hurt me. No, it was trying to replace me, and that's when I remembered everything, the truth I had buried so deep, that the apartment wasn't just old. It was cursed, and I wasn't the first to live there. That thing had always been there, and every tenant before me had disappeared, their memories erased, their faces taken, and I wasn't leaving, not ever, not alive, and I was already part of it, part of the house, part of the thing that had been calling to me, and I felt my body change, my mind twist, as the darkness seeped into my soul, as it consumed everything I was, and when the thing's hand closed around my wrist, I knew it was over, that I was gone, that I was already in the dark, but I remembered, I knew who I was, who I had been, and I thought of the world I used to know, the people I used to be, and I cried for them, for me, but it didn't matter because it was already too late, and now I wait, just like the others, trapped in the space between, whispering to anyone who will listen, but no one ever does, and the house is still here, still waiting, still calling for the next one to come, to step through the door, to be consumed. And I know they will, because they always do. Story 12. I've always believed I could handle things, you know. I've been through enough in my life to think I'd seen everything, but I had no idea that one simple choice, one act of curiosity, would lead to something that would shatter everything I knew about reality, about myself, about the world we live in. And it all started a few months ago when I moved into this new apartment, a small, quiet place in an old building just on the edge of the city, a place that seemed perfect, not too expensive, not too fancy, just a place to sleep and rest, and for a while, I thought I'd found peace. But that feeling didn't last. Not when I started noticing the strange things. At first, it was little things, nothing that would make me question my sanity, but enough to make me uneasy. A door that wouldn't stay closed, a light flickering in the middle of the night, whispers coming from the walls when I was sure no one was around. But I tried to brush it off, chalk it up to stress or the creaking of an old building. But then, things began to escalate. I woke up one morning to find my entire kitchen rearranged, the dishes stacked in strange patterns on the counter, and I thought maybe I'd done it in my sleep. But then I started noticing the scratch marks on the floor, like something had been dragged across it, and I couldn't explain it. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was the feeling that someone was watching me, that sense of being observed. Like eyes were always on me. And no matter where I went in the apartment, no matter what I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that something was waiting. And it wasn't until the first night I heard the voice that I truly began to understand what I was dealing with. It was soft at first, just a whisper, so faint that I thought it was my imagination. But when I listened closer, it was clear it was calling my name, just a soft, breathy whisper from somewhere deep in the walls, and I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. And I told myself I was just hearing things, but the whisper came again, and then again, and it was always my name, always that same voice. And that's when I realized I wasn't imagining it, it was real. And it wasn't the wind or the building settling, it was something else, something that had been here long before me. And that's when the nightmares started. They came at first in flashes, just images of something I couldn't quite place, a shadow that followed me wherever I went, a feeling of dread that hung in the air like a thick fog, and I couldn't shake it, not during the day, not at night. And then I woke up one morning to find a note on the floor beside my bed, written in handwriting that wasn't mine. The words were simple, just 2 lines. You shouldn't have come here, and it's waiting for you. And I couldn't make sense of it. I didn't know if it was a prank, if someone was messing with me, but as the days passed, I started to feel it, that presence. It was growing stronger, more persistent, until one night I couldn't stand it anymore. I decided to leave, to pack my things and get out before it was too late. But when I went to open the door, it wouldn't budge. It was locked from the outside. And I couldn't find the key. And as I stood there, trying to force the door open, I heard it again, the whisper, now louder, closer, like it was just behind me. And I turned around, expecting to see something, anything. But there was nothing, just the empty apartment. But then the temperature dropped, and I could see my breath. And that's when I felt it, that cold, clammy touch on my shoulder. And when I turned, there it was, the figure, a tall, shadowy silhouette standing in the corner of the room. Its eyes glowing a sickly yellow, its mouth stretched into a grotesque smile. And I couldn't move, couldn't scream. I was frozen, trapped in that moment. And it stepped forward, its long fingers reaching out toward me, and I closed my eyes, waiting for the inevitable. But nothing happened, at least not at first, because when I opened my eyes again, the figure was gone, and I was alone. But I knew, deep down, I knew it wasn't over, that it was just waiting for the right moment to come back. And that's when the others started to appear. First, it was just in the corner of my vision, figures darting past the windows at night, shapes moving just out of sight. But eventually, they started showing up during the day, in the reflections, in mirrors, in the glass of my phone, and sometimes I would hear them, whispering to me, telling me things I didn't want to hear, things I couldn't understand. But it was clear that they weren't human, they couldn't be, they were something else, something older. And I started to lose track of time, days blending into each other, and I began to wonder if I was even awake, if I had already lost my mind. But then the knock started, at first just a few soft taps on the door, but it didn't stop. It kept going, louder, more insistent, until I couldn't ignore it, and I opened the door to find nothing, just the empty hall. But when I stepped out, I heard it again, the whisper, but this time, it wasn't coming from the walls. It was coming from behind me, and I turned to see the shadow again, standing just outside the door, its eyes burning with a terrible hunger. And I knew then, that I wasn't going to make it out, not alive, because whatever was in that building, whatever, had been waiting for me, had already claimed me, and I was just another victim, just another lost soul in the long line of others who had come before. And now, as I sit here, writing this, I know it's only a matter of time before I'm gone, before they take me. But maybe, just maybe, if someone reads this, someone will understand, someone will know what happened here. And maybe that's the only hope I have left, that someone will remember. Story 13. I never believed in curses or hauntings or any of that crap they feed you in movies until the thing that followed me out of the woods made me question everything I thought was real, everything I thought was safe. And I swear to you on whatever's left of my sanity that I didn't go looking for this. I didn't try to summon anything or break into abandoned places like those idiots online. I just went hiking, that's all. Just a weekend trip to clear my head after my brother died, and I chose the old logging trail outside of Asheville, a place we used to go when we were kids, and I hadn't been back since he died because of how much it reminded me of him. But I thought if I could go there and just sit where we used to eat lunch or walk where we used to race, I might feel closer to him or maybe find some kind of closure. And for the first few hours it was fine, peaceful even, the air cold and clean, the trees swaying gently. No one around for miles, which is exactly what I wanted. But then I went off trail, not far, just over a ridge where I remembered a clearing with this huge flat rock we used to climb. And that's where I found it. Or maybe it found me, because I didn't hear anything, didn't see any warning signs, just this awful smell like copper and rot that got stronger the closer I got to the clearing. And when I stepped through the trees, I stopped cold because there was something wrong, something horribly wrong. Like the air itself was vibrating and the light looked too dim. Even though the sun was high, and in the middle of the clearing was this circle of stones I don't remember ever being there, arranged almost perfectly, but not quite, like someone tried to copy something without fully understanding it. And in the center of that circle was a hole, not just a dip in the ground, but an actual pit, maybe 5 feet wide, no bottom in sight. Just darkness that seemed to drink in the light around it. And I should have turned around. I know that now, but I was drawn to it. Not like some magic spell or trance, but like something deep in my gut needed to know what was inside. So I got close, just a few steps, and that's when I heard it. Not a voice exactly, but the echo of my name, like it was being whispered through gravel, and I jumped back, my heart pounding because I was completely alone. No one should have known I was even out there, and I spun around looking for someone, anyone. But the woods were silent and still, and when I looked back at the pit, it was gone. Just gone, like it had never been there, like I'd imagined the whole thing. And I ran. I won't lie. I turned and ran back toward the trail, not even caring if I tripped or broke an ankle, just running until I saw the familiar markers. And when I got back to the trailhead, my car was still there, untouched, and for a moment I let myself believe it was just a weird hallucination or maybe a grief response. But that night, the dream started, vivid and violent, always the same, a version of me, standing at the edge of the pit, staring down while something climbed out, something tall and thin with too many joints and a face that looked like it was made of skin stretched over someone else's skull. And I'd wake up gasping for breath, drenched in sweat, with the taste of soil and blood in my mouth. And it didn't stop, every night for weeks. Then I started finding things in my apartment I couldn't explain. Bits of earth on the floor, dead birds on my windowsill, even though I live on the 3rd floor, scratches on the inside of the bathroom mirror like something tried to claw its way out. And then the lights began to flicker whenever I looked at my reflection too long. And I swear to you, I started seeing something move behind me, just out of frame, something tall and hunched and watching. And every time I turned around, it was gone, but I could feel it. I could feel its breath on my neck, and I started staying awake for days at a time, afraid to sleep, drinking coffee until my hands shook and my vision blurred. But it didn't help because eventually I would pass out and the dreams would come back stronger. And then I started hearing the whispers while I was awake, low and guttural, sometimes saying my name, sometimes just gibberish that made my ears ring and my nose bleed. and I thought I was going insane, that maybe I'd finally snapped. But when my neighbor, old Mrs. Darlene, pulled me aside one afternoon and said she'd seen someone in my apartment while I was at work, a tall man with no face who stood in the living room for hours and never moved. I knew this wasn't just in my head, and things kept getting worse. Lights exploding when I walked under them, animals freaking out whenever I got near, cold spots in my apartment that never went away no matter how high I turned up the heat, and the pit started showing up again, not physically, but in places it shouldn't, in my dreams. On the backs of receipts, scrawled in black ink on my bathroom tiles when I woke up, and always that same whispering voice calling me back, telling me to finish what I started, to come home. And then one night, I came home to find every mirror in my place shattered, every piece laid out in a perfect circle on the floor around a fresh hole, this time in the center of my living room. And I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, just stood there staring at it, as that same stench of rot and copper filled my lungs, and I felt something rise from the darkness below, something I still refused to describe fully because putting it into words would make it too real. But I ran. Again, I ran out into the street barefoot and screaming. And the neighbors called the cops, and I spent the next 3 days in the hospital under psychiatric watch. But when they finally let me go and I returned to my apartment, everything was gone. The mirrors intact, no hole, no circle, like nothing had ever happened. And I tried to move on. I really did. Moved to a new place across town. Burned everything I owned from that apartment. And for a while it worked. The dreams stopped. The whispers faded. And I started sleeping again. But 3 nights ago, I woke up with dirt under my nails and dried blood on my hands. And there were muddy footprints leading from my bed to the hallway. Prints I didn't make. Prints that ended in a perfect circle of stones in the center of my living room floor. And now I know it's never going to stop. That I brought something back with me. Something old and patient and hungry. And every night it gets closer. Every night I hear it louder. Feel it watching me from the shadows. Waiting for the moment I give in and return to the pit. Because it doesn't just want to scare me. It wants me to belong to it. And I think, deep down, a part of me already does. Story 14. I was never the kind of person who believed in ghosts or demons or any of that nonsense people like to scare each other with around campfires or post on internet forums claiming they saw something in the woods or that their house was haunted because a light flickered or a door creaked at night. But all of that changed the year I moved into the basement apartment of an old Victorian house on 38th Street, a place I took more for the price than for the charm, because I was broke and tired and fresh out of a 3-year relationship that left me hollow. So I signed the lease without asking too many questions about the weird smell in the hallway or the fact that the windows were all painted shut or how the landlady, an old woman with cataracts and a voice like dry leaves, kept saying I needed to be respectful of the quiet, which I thought meant noise complaints from other tenants, but I would later learn meant something entirely different and infinitely more horrifying. Because the first few nights were uneventful aside from the heavy creaks from upstairs and the occasional scratching in the walls, which I assumed were rats or some other vermin. But then on the 4th night, I woke up at exactly 3:17 a.m. to the sound of something breathing in my closet. And I don't mean I thought I heard it or that it could have been the building shifting. I mean I was lying in bed with the covers pulled up to my chest, and I could hear something large exhaling slowly in a raspy, labored rhythm no more than 10 feet from where I lay frozen in fear. And I told myself not to move, not to make a sound, just to wait. And after what felt like hours it finally stopped, and when I worked up the courage to check the closet, there was nothing there. But the next morning I noticed deep scratches across the inside of the door and the faint smell of copper and rot that lingered long after I opened every window in the place. But I didn't leave, because I didn't want to be one of those people who freak out over nothing, and besides, where would I go? And so I stayed, even when the breathing became more frequent, always at the same time, always from the closet or sometimes the corner of the room where the shadows didn't quite match the angles of the walls. And then came the dreams, violent, Vivid dreams of being dragged down long hallways by unseen hands while something whispered my name over and over in a voice that sounded almost human but was layered with something else beneath it, like a second set of lips just behind the first. And when I woke up from those dreams, my legs were sore and bruised like I'd actually been pulled out of bed. And one morning I found the soles of my feet caked in dirt and what looked like ash. And that's when I started to notice that time wasn't working right anymore. I would blink and hours would pass. I'd hear the tick of my wall clock echo like a heartbeat. And more than once I woke up standing in a different room than I'd fallen. Asleep in, as if I'd been sleepwalking or, worse, carried. And then the mirrors began showing me things that weren't there. Reflections of myself standing still while I moved or smiling when I wasn't, or looking back over my shoulder as though watching something behind me that I couldn't see. And then came the knocking, soft at first, barely audible, like fingertips tapping on glass. But it grew louder each night until it sounded like someone punching the inside of the walls, screaming without. A voice, trying to be let out or let in, or maybe both. And every time I opened a cupboard or drawer or door after hearing it, there was nothing there, but the air felt wrong, heavier, colder, like it had been disturbed by something I couldn't name. And the landlady began avoiding me, wouldn't meet my eyes, just slipped notes under my door that said things like "stop feeding it attention" and "the house remembers," which made no sense and terrified me more than anything because it meant she knew. And when I finally confronted her, she just closed the door in my face and began muttering prayers in a language I didn't recognize. And that night I saw the thing for the first time, a tall, impossibly thin shape pressed against the hallway wall just outside my bedroom, where it stayed for 7 hours without moving or blinking or doing anything except existing. And the worst part was that I could hear it humming, not like a tune or song, but a low, primal frequency that made my teeth ache and my vision shimmer and my nose bleed. And when it finally vanished, it left behind deep black stains on the floor that never scrubbed out no matter what I used. And from then on it was always around, not constantly but often enough to know it wasn't random. Every time I thought I was about to forget, it reminded me, with a shadow under the door or a face in the steam of my mirror or a child's voice in my kitchen whispering it's hungry again. And I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, barely spoke to anyone. Because how could I explain this without sounding insane? And the one time I tried, to a friend from work who'd come over to check on me, she screamed the moment she walked in, pointed to the corner of the room and said, "Who the F asterisk asterisk is that asterisk?" even though I saw nothing. And then she ran out crying and wouldn't return my calls. And I knew then I was on my own, trapped with this thing that didn't want to kill me but wear me down, unravel me until I was pliable, hollow, and ready. And I started dreaming of the basement beneath my apartment, a place I'd never seen but now knew intimately, a square room made of stone with no doors, filled with bones and black water, and a chair in the center with leather restraints and a mirror facing it. And in the mirror was always me, except not me, something in me, grinning wide with eyes that weren't mine and skin that peeled in slow, wet strips. And I realized, somehow, that the thing had been here long before me, that this house wasn't haunted so much as it was alive, and I was being digested, and every tenant before me had gone the same way, swallowed into the walls, their memories etched into the wallpaper, their final screams woven into the floorboards, and the house fed on attention, on fear, on belief. And the only way to survive was to never look at it too long, never acknowledge it, never let it know you saw it. And so I tried, I truly did, to ignore the fingers reaching out from the cracks at night, or the whispers that called to me from the shower drain, or the laughter that echoed from under my bed. But one night I woke up and the apartment was gone, the walls replaced with stone, the air thick with rot, and I was strapped to the chair in the dream room. And across from me sat a perfect copy of myself with empty eyes and a twitching grin, and it leaned forward and whispered, "It's your turn now." And then I was back in bed, but something had changed. Because when I looked in the mirror that morning, it smiled back even though I didn't, and now I hear the knocking even when I'm outside, see the shadows even in daylight, feel the house moving in me, around me, whispering through me. And I don't know if I ever really left that room, or if this is just what happens to people who stay too long. We become hollow, become doors, become part of it. Story 15. I was just a night security guard at an old municipal archive facility tucked away on the edge of town, a half-forgotten concrete block from the 70s that hadn't seen renovations or new staff in decades. And I took the job because I thought it would be quiet, uneventful, just me and rows of dusty shelves full of old files no one cared about anymore. Police records from the 60s, property disputes from the 70s, dead cases, dead names. And I was fine with that. I liked the silence. Liked being left alone after everything that happened last year with my sister's death, and the way people kept looking at me like I was hiding something when all I'd done was find her body. But the building was strange from the beginning. Not just old, but heavy in a way I didn't have words for. Like the walls were too thick, like the air didn't flow right. And on my first night, the guy I replaced handed me the keys without making eye contact and just said don't answer the elevator if it dings. After midnight, then he left, and I laughed about it later, thought maybe it was a joke. But at 12:47 that night, the elevator dinged, doors slid open, no one inside, no call logged, no power surge. Just opened on its own and stayed open until I went over and hit the ground floor button. And it closed and left me sweating without knowing why, but I brushed it off. Went back to the security office, watched the feed, 8 cameras. One for each hallway and one in the basement that always had this weird flicker to it like static just around the edges. And by the end of the week, I was starting to get used to the weird quirks of the place, the way the lights buzzed louder when I walked under them. The way the fire exit door on the north hallway always felt cold to the touch even in summer. The way I'd hear paper rustling in rooms with no windows. But then I started seeing things, not on the feed at first, but reflected in the glass of the office window. Shapes moving in the hallway that weren't there when I turned, or shadows that didn't belong to anything. And the night the basement camera went out completely, I made the mistake of going down to check it, flashlight in hand, the concrete stairs damp under my boots, the door groaning like it hadn't been opened in years. And as soon as I stepped inside, I could smell something I will never forget, wet soil, old rot, and something sweet underneath it, like decay and sugar. And there was a sound too, faint and wet, like something being chewed or torn or sucked. And when I turned the light down the rows of boxes, I saw something crouched between the shelves, too tall to be crouching that low, its arms long and pale, its head just slightly cocked like it heard me before I made a sound. And when the beam landed on its face, it didn't look away. It just opened its mouth wide and kept opening, a long, dark tunnel where its throat should have been. And it moved like a puppet with tangled strings as it jerked upright and vanished, down a side hall that shouldn't have existed, and I ran. I ran all the way back up the stairs and locked myself in the office, heart pounding, swearing I wouldn't go down there again. But the next night the camera came back on, crystal clear, and showed nothing unusual. Just the empty basement, neat rows, no sign of the hallway I'd seen. And that's when I realized the building itself was changing, rooms slightly out of place, a door where there wasn't one before, a hallway that bent at a sharper angle than it had yesterday. And when I asked the day staff about it, they just looked at me like I was joking, said nothing had changed, said I must have been overtired, maybe even hallucinating from too much coffee or not enough sleep. But I knew better. And things escalated fast after that. Phones ringing with no caller ID, voices on the other end that sounded like my sister even though she's been dead for 8 months, calling my name over and over, whispering, "I know you left me. You watch me die. You could have stopped it." And the part that scared me most was that I hadn't told anyone what she said that night. The way she looked at me when I found her bleeding out on the floor, the way she reached up and whispered something I couldn't hear before she died. But now the voices were saying those same words, repeating them every night between the hours of 1 and 3 a.m., and I stopped answering, unplugged the phone. But then the calls came through the radio instead, a channel I didn't tune to, just static, and her voice again, louder now, desperate, angry. And then the smell came back, that same sweet rot drifting up from the air vents. And I knew something from the basement had followed me, or maybe I had followed it. Maybe just looking at it had been an invitation. And then the footage started looping, 3-second clips of me sitting still. But in the background something was moving toward me, frame by frame. never getting closer when I watched the feed. But when I looked away and then back again, it had moved, always closer, like it only advanced when I wasn't looking. And then came the knocking from inside the locked rooms, the ones no one ever used, 3 slow knocks, always the same rhythm. And when I opened them, there was never anything inside except a single file or photo from one of the old cases, always a child who disappeared between 1975 and 1983, always with the same last expression frozen on their face, wide-eyed, slack-jawed terror, and I started seeing them too, their shapes reflected in the darkened windows, huddled in corners, reaching toward me just before the lights flickered out. And I think the worst night was when I woke up in the office, even though I know I didn't fall asleep. And the monitors were all off except for one, the basement cam, which showed my sister standing alone in the center of the room, staring up at the lens with that same twisted mouth, and she raised one hand and pointed straight at me and said, "Calm down." And I don't remember deciding to move, but I was already on the stairs before I knew it, walking down step by step even though every nerve in my body told me to run. And when I got there, the basement was different again. No shelves. Just a single door with no handle, made of rusted metal and covered in scratch marks. And from behind it, I heard her screaming my name, and begging me to open it. And I reached out and touched it and felt heat, pain, and something moved behind the metal, something breathing heavy and fast. And then I heard a second voice, low and cruel and not hers, whispering she belongs to me. And then the lights went out, total darkness. And I turned and ran, and I don't remember climbing the stairs, but I was back in the office and everything was normal again. But the screen still showed that door, and it still does, every night, even though no one else can see it, and every night she calls to me. And the thing calls too, and I don't know which one is real anymore, or if they're both parts of the same thing. And sometimes I see the building from the outside when I drive in, and it looks smaller than it should be, like the inside has been growing while the outside stays the same. And I know I should quit. I know I should leave. But I don't. I can't. Something in me is tethered now, like I've been marked or infected or chosen. And I don't think I'll ever really leave this place. Not fully. Not even if I walk away, because some part of me already belongs to the thing in the basement. And every time the elevator dings after midnight, I can feel it smiling. Story 16. I never really talked about what happened in the house on Drowners Hill, partly because I knew how it would sound and partly because some things don't want to be remembered. And every time I get close to speaking the truth, something goes wrong: power outages, migraines, bloody noses, or a sense of pressure building in my chest like I'm about to scream underwater. But I'm doing this now because I can't sleep, and I keep hearing scratching from inside the walls of my apartment, even though I live on the 3rd floor, and there's nothing behind that drywall but brick. And maybe if I get it all out, really all of it, then whatever I brought back from that place might finally leave me alone, because it started in a way that wasn't scary at all. Just a listing on a rental website, cheap place for the summer, remote, big porch, lots of trees, the kind of place you go to get away from the city, heal from burnout, and try to forget the bad things piling up in your inbox and bloodstream. And I told myself I deserved it, even though deep down I knew I wasn't running from work. I was running from the last call my brother ever made to me, sobbing, incoherent, saying things were moving in his mirrors and that he couldn't sleep with the closet closed. And I didn't listen, didn't take him seriously. And then 2 weeks later, he stepped in front of a train wearing clothes that didn't belong to him. And I never forgave myself for laughing at him on that call. So maybe that's why I took the house on Drowners Hill. Maybe I wanted to understand what he felt. Or maybe something was already pulling me there. Because when I arrived, the place looked nothing like the photos. Where I'd seen sunlight and fresh paint now stood a sagging roof, peeling walls. Windows so dirty they looked smoked. And the woman who gave me the key said nothing about the condition, only stared at me with eyes so dark they had no color, and said, "Don't follow the noises past the trees," which made no sense to me at the time, but would come to define everything, because the first few nights were fine, quiet even, except for the smell in the attic, like old milk and hot copper, and the way the hallway lights would pull slightly when I passed beneath them. But I chalked it all up to age and stress and maybe mold. until the fifth night when I heard crying coming from the woods behind the house, and I stood on the back porch with my phone flashlight and listened, really listened, and it was definitely a child. Sobbing, just far enough away to be unclear, but close enough to be real, and something in me screamed not to follow it. But I did. I walked barefoot into the trees, flashlight flickering more the deeper I went, until the sound just stopped. Vanished like a breath in winter, and I turned around and saw the house was gone, or maybe hidden, because I wandered for almost an hour and never found the clearing again. Just more and more forest, and the moon never moved, and the air felt wrong, like thick static. And when I finally stumbled back into the yard, shivering and barefoot and covered in scratches I didn't remember getting, the porch light was off even though I'd left it on, and the back door was ajar, swinging slightly like someone had just gone inside. And I knew I hadn't left it that way. And when I stepped into the house, something had changed. The walls were damp and pulsing like they were breathing. And the lights didn't work except for the one in the bathroom, which buzzed like an insect hive. And I saw something in the mirror, not a reflection, not exactly, more like a version of me that blinked a beat too slow and smiled a little too wide. And I turned away, heart hammering, and told myself it was just sleep deprivation, that I was grieving and needed rest, and I locked myself in the bedroom that night. But the scratching started around 2 a.m., behind the walls, something sharp dragging across the wood, like claws or nails, and I held still and listened. As the sound circled the room, ceiling to floor, over and over, and then it stopped, completely stopped, and I didn't breathe for what felt like minutes, and then something pressed its face to the other side of the wall behind my headboard and whispered my name. Not a loud whisper, but a dry one, like leaves blowing across cement, and I couldn't move, couldn't scream. And when I finally opened my mouth, all that came out was blood. Not a lot, just a trickle, but enough to make me run to the mirror and check. And my tongue had bite marks, deep ones, like I'd bitten it in my sleep, or someone else had. And after that, the house never let me sleep again. Every night the noises got worse, footsteps pacing the attic even though it was nailed shut, sobbing echoing through the floorboards, a radio playing old jazz in a room that didn't have a radio, and the woods outside grew darker every day, even in daylight, like the trees were leaning closer, hungry for something, and I started dreaming of my brother, only it wasn't really him, not anymore. His mouth hung open wider than it should, and his eyes were bleeding, and he told me he saw it too, that it came through mirrors and holes in the wall and places we looked too long without blinking. And he begged me not to stay there, but I couldn't leave because every time I packed my things, the car wouldn't start, or the road would disappear, or the forest would just shift like it was alive, and I stopped eating, stopped drinking, because the food tasted like dirt and the water ran red sometimes. And then the house started showing me things, pictures on the walls that changed when I looked away, always photos of people crying or screaming or staring blankly into the woods. And sometimes I'd see my own face in them, in a crowd of others, as if I'd always been there. And one night I woke up standing in the basement, which I hadn't known existed, facing a brick wall with my hands pressed flat against it. And there were dozens of scratches on the floor around me, like someone, or many someones, had been dragged across it, and there was blood on my fingertips, and I didn't remember how I got there or what I'd done. And the next day I found a tooth in the sink, not mine, too small, like a child's, and I started hearing the name Elias whispered over and over in the wind, even though I never knew anyone named Elias. And when I screamed back at it to stop, the entire house seemed to exhale, all the doors opening at once, a long breath of hot, rotting air spilling through the rooms, and I felt something move behind me, fast, tall, thin, and grinning, always grinning, and I locked myself in the bathroom for hours until morning came. But story 16. I never really talked about what happened in the house on Drowner's Hill, partly because I knew how it would sound and partly because some things don't want to be remembered. And every time I get close to speaking the truth, something goes wrong: power outages, migraines, bloody noses, or a sense of pressure building in my chest like I'm about to scream underwater. But I'm doing this now because I can't sleep, and I keep hearing scratching from inside the walls of my apartment, even though I live on the third floor, and there's nothing behind that drywall but brick. And maybe if I get it all out, really all of it, then whatever I brought back from that place might finally leave me alone, because it started in a way that wasn't scary at all. Just a listing on a rental website, cheap place for the summer, remote, big porch, lots of trees, the kind of place you go to get away from the city, heal from burnout, and try to forget the bad things piling up in your inbox and bloodstream. And I told myself I deserved it, even though deep down I knew I wasn't running from work. I was running from the last call my brother ever made to me, sobbing, incoherent, saying things were moving in his mirrors and that he couldn't sleep with the closet closed. And I didn't listen, didn't take him seriously, and then 2 weeks later he stepped in front of a train wearing clothes that didn't belong to him. And I never forgave myself for laughing at him on that call. So maybe that's why I took them. House on Drowner's Hill. Maybe I wanted to understand what he... Story 17. I don't care if you believe me or not, but I need to tell someone what happened to me in that house on the edge of the forest. Not because I think it will save me. I'm far beyond saving now. But maybe if someone else hears it, they won't make the same mistake I did. Because I used to be the kind of person who didn't believe in anything I couldn't touch, see, or measure. Someone who scoffed at ghosts and laughed at the idea of curses or evil spirits. Someone who thought fear was for children, and stories were just stories, until I found myself standing in the ruins of my own life, trembling and alone, trying to hold on to my sanity while everything around me twisted into something cold and watching, something with teeth. Something I couldn't fight or reason with, only endure, and even that didn't last. But it started quietly, as these things often do, with a sudden opportunity that felt too good to pass up. An old friend of the family who said he needed someone to stay in his inherited home while he sorted out some legal issues from abroad, and I had just lost my job, was behind on rent, and desperate for any kind of stability. So I said yes without thinking, packed what little I had, and took the train north to a forgotten little town surrounded by hills and trees that felt older than time. And the moment I stepped off the platform, I felt like I had stepped into another world. The air was different there, heavier, like it carried the weight of things unsaid and unwelcome. But I ignored it, told myself I was just tired, told myself not to let small-town weirdness get under my skin. But when I got to the house, it was worse than I expected, not because it was dirty or broken down, but because it felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain, like it was holding its breath as I opened the door. And as soon as I stepped inside, I felt like I had walked into a memory that didn't belong to me, the furniture all covered in white sheets, the air dry and still, but heavy with a scent like dried flowers and something faintly sweet that I later realized smelled exactly like rotting fruit left too long in the sun. And the first night was fine, mostly, though I couldn't sleep and kept feeling like someone was standing at the foot of the bed, just out of sight, watching, and when I turned on the light, nothing was there. And I tried to laugh it off. I really did. Even when I noticed all the mirrors in the house had been either removed or covered with old bedsheets nailed into the frames, even when I heard the soft, repetitive tapping in the walls like fingers drumming or nails scraping slowly down the wood behind the paint, I told myself old houses made noises, that isolation could make you imagine things, that it was all in my head. Even when the dreams started, dreams of being dragged across the floor by something I couldn't see, waking up with bruises on my legs and scratches I couldn't explain, dreams of a woman with no face whispering nonsense in a voice that sounded like whine through dry leaves, always telling me to go down, down, deeper. And when I finally went into the basement, because of course there was a basement, I found things I couldn't rationalize, not anymore. Shelves lined with old dolls whose eyes had been gouged out, boxes full of teeth that didn't match any animal I knew, and a large wooden chair bolted to the floor in the middle of a chalk circle stained dark with something that looked and smelled exactly like dried blood. And that night the noises got louder, the walls shook, and I swear something tried to open my bedroom door even though I had locked it and pushed a dresser against it. And when I screamed, no one came, because the nearest neighbor was over a mile away and no one in town ever made eye contact with me, as if they knew, as if they didn't want to get involved. And every day I stayed, something else got worse. The clocks all stopped at the same time, 3:33 a.m. The water ran black for exactly 3 minutes every night, and sometimes I heard voices coming from the attic. But when I opened the door, there was nothing but dust and darkness and a window nailed shut with heavy boards that rattled as if something on the other side was trying to get in or get out. I'm not sure which, and I began to lose time, waking up in different parts of the house without remembering how I got there. My phone would reset itself every morning, no calls, no texts, no signal, and I stopped being able to sleep for more than a few minutes at a time, because every time I closed my eyes I would feel it crawling closer, something ancient, something patient, something that didn't need to rush because it knew it had me, and the dreams became waking visions. Like seeing a face pressed into the surface of the bathroom mirror even though the mirror was gone, or hearing laughter echo down the hallway when I was the only one in the house, and once I looked out the window and saw myself standing in the yard, staring up at me, unmoving, eyes black and mouth slowly opening as if to scream, but no sound came, just silence and that sickly smell of rot. And I smashed the window with a lamp and screamed at the thing to leave, but when I looked again, the yard was empty and the broken glass was gone, as if it had never happened, and by then I knew I had to leave, had to get out no matter what. But the front door wouldn't open, not because it was locked, but because it simply wouldn't move like it had, fused with the wall. And every time I tried the back door it was gone, not locked, gone, replaced with more wall, and I screamed, tore at the drywall, found nothing but brick and bone behind it, and the lights started flickering, even the ones I hadn't turned on. And the house groaned like it was breathing, like it was laughing, and the shadows began moving without any source, crawling along the floor and walls like oil slicks reaching for me. In the final night I found myself in the attic. Even though I had nailed the door shut from the inside and thrown the hammer into the woods, but there I was, standing in the dark, barefoot and cold, and something stepped out of the corner, tall, thin, with eyes like hollow sockets and a mouth that split open far too wide. And it said nothing, only pointed at the floor, and I saw dozens of names carved into the wood, mine among them, and the thing stepped into me or I stepped into it, I'm not sure. But I woke up 2 days later in a hospital, 50 miles away, no idea how I got there. And when they asked me what happened, I tried to explain, but the words came out wrong, like my mouth didn't want to betray whatever I had seen. And all the tests came back normal, and they let me go after a few days, saying stress had triggered a break. But I know better. I know I was taken or changed or broken in that place, because I haven't slept since, not really. And every time I close my eyes, I hear that voice whispering deeper, deeper, and mirrors don't show my reflection anymore. Not right away. It lags like it's thinking or watching or waiting. And sometimes I catch a glimpse of that house in windows or puddles or even the surface of my coffee. And sometimes, in the dead of night, I hear knocking from inside my closet. Slow, patient knocks, like someone waiting for me to answer. And I know if I open it, I won't come back. Story 18. I never believed in curses or hauntings or anything other than what I could see with my own eyes and touch with my own hands, because I thought the world was only made of what science could explain and logic could unravel, and anything beyond that was just superstition or fantasy or desperate minds trying to make sense of chaos. But what happened to me in the fall of 2022 changed everything I thought I knew about reality and stripped away the layers of denial I had built up over a lifetime, and left me raw and trembling and afraid of the dark in a way that no grown adult should ever admit. And it all started with a job that should have been nothing. Just a temporary contract to catalog and photograph artifacts left behind in a condemned building scheduled for demolition in a rural part of the state. A building that used to be a private psychiatric hospital built sometime in the early 1900s and closed in the 70s after a series of deaths no one could explain and a handful of lawsuits that were settled quietly before anything reached the courts. And I wasn't alone at first. There was a team, a small group of us hired to go room by room and box up anything deemed historically significant or potentially valuable. And the first 2 days were uneventful, if a bit grim. Rotting files, broken medical equipment, old leather restraints still bolted to iron bed frames, dark stains on the floor that no one wanted to investigate too closely. But on the third day, something shifted. Something small at first, like a bad smell that came and went, or the way the temperature dropped sharply in certain rooms even though the weather outside was warm and still. And one of the interns, a kid named Alex, started complaining that he could hear someone breathing behind him whenever he stepped into the old therapy wing. And I laughed it off because I thought he was just trying to creep us out or maybe just easily spooked. But that same afternoon, he walked out without saying a word, left his gear on the floor, and didn't answer calls or texts. And when we checked the building security footage later, it showed him standing motionless in front of a mirror for nearly 10 minutes before suddenly sprinting down the hall and vanishing through the main doors. And after that, it was like something had been let in, or maybe woken up, because things got worse, subtle at first, lights flickering even though the building had no power, cold spots that seemed to follow us from room to room, the sound of footsteps echoing above us even when we were alone in the building. But then we started finding things we hadn't cataloged, things that weren't there before. Things like photographs that showed us standing in rooms we hadn't entered yet, or cassette tapes with distorted voices whispering our names and phrases like, "You belong to it now," and "She watches through your eyes," and I wanted to quit. I really did. But I needed the money and convinced myself it was all some elaborate prank or group hysteria, that we were just freaking each other out. Until I started dreaming about the woman in the red dress, the same woman every night, her eyes black and mouth too wide, standing at the end of my bed whispering things I couldn't understand but felt in my bones. And when I told the others, they went pale because they had seen her too. And one of them, Marcus, who was usually the skeptic, said he had woken up with dirt under his nails and his shoes soaking wet even though he hadn't left the house. And then there was the time I found myself standing outside the building at dawn with no memory of driving there. My phone full of photos I hadn't taken showing doors half open and shadows shaped like people in places we had boarded up. And the deeper we went into that building, the more it felt like it was watching us, like it wanted something from us, like it was slowly unraveling our sense of time and space and turning us against each other. And then Sarah disappeared, gone, without a trace. Her things left behind in one of the old administrative offices, and all we found was a note written in handwriting that looked like hers but was shaky and frantic, saying only, "It's inside me now." And after that we stopped sleeping, stopped speaking much at all, because what else was there to say? And we kept hearing that low humming, that rhythmic pulsing sound that came from the walls, and sometimes we'd turn a corner and find a hallway that wasn't there before, or doors that opened into blackness so deep our flashlights couldn't pierce it. And when I finally quit, when I finally walked out and swore I'd never return, it didn't matter, because it came with me. I know it did, because I still see her, the woman in the red dress. Not just in dreams, but in mirrors, in the reflections of windows, in the shimmer of a puddle after rain. And I feel her breath on my neck at night and wake up with bruises shaped like fingers around my ankles and wrists, and I hear her voice whispering through the static when I turn on the television, always saying the same thing, "You let me in." And I can't be around people anymore because sometimes I black out and wake up somewhere else, sometimes with blood on my hands. And no one will tell me whose blood it is, and I've tried to end it more than once, but something always stops me, something always intervenes, like the pills spilling down the drain, or the belt snapping, or the car stalling just before the cliff. And I know now that I'm not alone in my body, that there's something sharing space with me, something ancient and cruel and patient, and it doesn't want me dead, not yet, because it wants to use me, to wear me like a mask and walk into the world through me. And I think it already has, because sometimes I say things I don't mean and people flinch away from me as if they see something I can't, and sometimes I catch my own reflection smiling when I'm not, and I don't know how much longer I have before I'm completely gone, before it's just her behind my eyes, looking out through my face. And I don't know if this story will even reach anyone, or if she'll let it out or erase it or twist it into something else. But I had to try. Because if you're reading this and you feel cold on the back of your neck, or you see someone in the corner of your eye wearing red who wasn't there before, leave now. Run. Burn the house if you have to. Don't let her look at you. Don't let her speak your name. Because once she knows your name, she never forgets. Story 19. I never thought I'd be the kind of person who believed in anything beyond the ordinary. Never thought I'd be the kind of person who wrote down a confession like this hoping that someone somewhere would believe me, or at least read it and feel the weight of what I went through and maybe, just maybe, avoid going down the same path. Because what happened to me wasn't like the stories you hear about haunted houses or cursed places or monsters lurking in the dark. It was something much worse. Something quieter and slower and far more patient. Something that grew in the background of my life like mold in the walls. Something I didn't see until it was already inside me, already changing me, already feeding on things I didn't know I had. And I know how this sounds. I know how insane it all must seem, but I swear on everything I've ever loved that it started with something so small. A rental. A single month subletting a third-floor apartment in a town I didn't know, a place I picked at. Random when I needed to get away from everything after my father died, and my job collapsed, and my relationship disintegrated under the weight of things we never said. So I packed what little I had and took a bus across state lines to this quiet little neighborhood where everything seemed just fine on the surface. Birds chirping, people walking dogs, the smell of barbecues and lawns being mowed. But there was something off from the very first night, something I couldn't put my finger on, a kind of stillness that didn't feel peaceful, but more like waiting. And the apartment was old but clean, creaky floors and high ceilings. Strange little carvings in the crown molding that I assumed were just old-timey decor, and a smell I couldn't quite place, like old leaves and rust. And the landlady, Ms. Rayburn, was polite but distant, her eyes always darting behind me when we spoke, like she was watching something move that I couldn't see. And I chalked it all up to nerves and grief and exhaustion. I told myself I was being dramatic, that I just needed sleep and space and time to heal. But the second night, I woke up at exactly 3:17 a.m. to the sound of something dragging across the ceiling above me. A heavy scraping that went from one end of the room to the other and then stopped dead as soon as I sat up. And when I asked Ms. Rayburn the next morning who lived upstairs, she just gave me this tight little smile and said no one had rented that floor in over 10 years, that it was unsafe and locked off. And I didn't know what to do with that, didn't know whether to push or leave it alone. And of course I left it alone, because I didn't want to be the paranoid tenant or the kind of person who jumps at shadows. But the noise came back every night, always at 3:17, always moving slowly overhead. And then the dreams started, strange dreams where I was walking through the apartment, but everything was different. The walls covered in dripping black paint, the air filled with this thick buzzing like static or flies or both. And there was always someone standing in the corner just out of sight, breathing heavy and ragged. And every time I tried to move toward them, I'd wake up soaked in sweat. And I began finding things move during the day, small things like my keys or toothbrush not where I left them, or lights flicking off when I was sure I'd left them on. And once I came home to find the kitchen clock turned backward and the time stuck at 3:17, and I tried to laugh it off, tried to pretend it wasn't happening. But then I started losing time, started waking up in different clothes, started finding strange dirt under my fingernails and long scratches down my arms that I couldn't explain. And I told myself I was just unraveling from the stress, that grief was playing tricks on me. Until one night, I woke up standing at the foot of the stairs leading to the third floor, keys in my hand. The door opened, even though I never had a key to it before, and what was worse was the air coming down from that stairwell, thick and cold and heavy like something rotting in a locked trunk. And I could hear breathing again, but not from above me, from behind me. And when I turned, no one was there, but I could still feel it, like someone had been inches away and just stepped out of sight. And I slammed the door and ran back to bed, heart racing. And in the morning, the key was gone. The door locked again like it had never been touched. And when I tried to talk to Ms. Rayburn about it, she just looked at me with this pity in her eyes and said, "Sometimes the house chooses people." And I had no idea what that meant until I started hearing the voices through the vents. whispering my name in dozens of different tones, some familiar, some strange, some sounding like my dead father, some sounding like me, and the mirrors began showing things that weren't there, reflections of rooms I'd never seen, hallways that bent the wrong way, people with no faces, just standing, waiting, watching. And then the drawings began. These frantic scribbles I'd find in my notebook or on the walls, always of the same figure, tall and thin with a mouth too wide and too many eyes. And once I woke up to find it drawn in chalk across my ceiling. And that day I finally packed my things and tried to leave, but the front door wouldn't open. Not stuck, not jammed, just gone. Replaced with smooth wall like it had never been a door at all. And every window showed a different sky. Not the one outside, but some bruised purple expanse filled with things moving just beneath the clouds. And the clocks all stopped ticking, and I couldn't call anyone because my phone just played static no matter who I dialed. And I screamed for help until my throat bled and no one came. No one heard. And when I finally collapsed in the hallway, I swear, I felt something step over me. Not walk. Step. Like a spider the size of a man. Deliberate and careful. And from that point on, the house changed. Or I did. Because the layout shifted daily. Doors led to different rooms. Stairways doubled back into themselves. The lights grew dimmer. The buzzing louder. And the longer I stayed, the harder it became to remember who I was before, like the house was eating parts of me, not physically but mentally, emotionally, memories fading, words slipping. And when I looked in the mirror, I wasn't sure I was seeing myself anymore, because the eyes were wrong, too wide, too dark, and I saw things move just behind me, but when I turned, nothing was there. Just flickers and shadows and a smell like burnt copper. And one night, I found Ms. Rayburn standing in the hall staring into an empty room and whispering, "It's hungry again." And when I asked her what that meant, she just laughed. This broken laugh like something scraping bone, and said, "You should have left before the third night." And that's when I realized it wasn't just a haunted house. It was something else, something alive and ancient and hungry. Something that lured people in like a spider's web, made them feel safe, gave them time to settle in. And then it began feeding, not on flesh, but on time, memory, fear, identity. And now I don't know how long I've been here. Days, weeks, months maybe. Because there's no light, no sound anymore except the breathing in the walls and the soft, wet slither of something dragging itself across the ceiling at night. And I write this not because I think it will save me. I know it's too late for that. But because if anyone finds this, if anyone ever hears of an apartment at the end of Juniper Street with ivy-covered brick and a smiling landlady and a third floor that's always empty, don't go. Don't look. Don't answer the ad. Don't even drive past it. Because once you're in, once it sees you, once it learns your name, it never lets go. And no matter how loud you scream or how hard you pray, the house remembers you and it never forgets. Story 20. I don't tell this story often, and when I do, I make sure to leave out the details that make people stare like I've grown a second face. But you asked for truth, so here it is, just words, just one long breathless telling like the night it all happened. Because sometimes if I stop to breathe, I feel like it'll pull me back in. So listen. When I was 17, I lived in a house that didn't want me there. And I don't mean that in the usual angsty teen way. I mean the actual structure, the walls. The beams, the air inside it held something old and angry, and I think it knew I wasn't supposed to survive there. Not with the way it groaned at night. Not with how the shadows never stayed where they belonged. And not with the fact that everyone I knew who entered that place began acting wrong. Like my mother who'd stare at the static on the TV for hours whispering words I never understood. Or my little sister who started hiding under her bed every time the sun went down. Or my father who once put a chair against the attic door and told me not to ask why, just never open it. And maybe I should have listened. Maybe I should have run like my gut screamed every morning when I woke up and found my bedroom rearranged, no one admitting they'd done it. The drawers emptied, the closet door wide open, But curiosity is a sickness sometimes, one that festers and grows and makes you forget how to be afraid until you're standing in the attic. The chair moved. The door cracked open with the sound of something sighing on the other side, like it had been waiting for me, like it knew I'd disobey eventually, and I did. I stepped inside, flashlight shaking in my hand, breathing louder than I meant to. The smell of old wood and something wet and rotten curling into my nose until I gagged, and that's when I saw the markings carved into the beams, circles and eyes, and what I now know were names scratched out, one of which was mine, already half carved, already waiting. And that was when I heard the voice, not out loud, not in my ears, but right behind my eyes, like a thought that didn't belong to me, whispering, "You're home now." And I ran and fell down the stairs, and when I looked back, the attic door had slammed shut on its own. The chair already back beneath the handle, like nothing had happened, like the house was pretending again. But I knew then, and things got worse after that, because that night I dreamed of the attic, only it wasn't a dream, not the way I felt when I woke. Up standing in front of the door again, hand on the knob, dirt under my nails, not the kind you get from your yard, but the black kind, old, damp, the kind that smells like something buried, and I couldn't get it off, no matter how hard I scrubbed. And then my sister started drawing things, faces with no mouths, people standing outside our windows with bones for fingers, and she said they talked to her, that they wanted to trade places, that they were cold and tired and hungry, and I should have taken her and left, but by then I couldn't, because every time I packed a bag it vanished. Every time I tried the front door it let me back inside, and when I called friends no one answered, even when I screamed, even when I left voicemails begging them to come. And my parents just stared, hollow-eyed, like mannequins, like whatever was inside the house had already replaced them, and I was next, and maybe I was, because I started forgetting things, whole days gone, blood under my bed, photos of me sleeping taken from angles I couldn't explain, and the worst was the mirror, because one night I looked and my reflection didn't move, just smiled and pressed its hand to the glass, and I swear it mouthed the words "soon," and I lost it. I punched the mirror, shattered it, but in the pieces I saw not one version of me but dozens, all of them doing different things, crying, laughing, dying, and behind them all the attic, the markings, the thing in the dark just watching, always watching, and I stopped sleeping after that. I couldn't, not when I knew I'd wake up somewhere else, somewhere deeper in, like the house was folding me into it, room by room, until it could close around me like a mouth, and it almost did, because the last night, the one that truly broke me, I found my sister standing at the top of the stairs, covered in those symbols, her eyes black, not rolled back, not shadowed, just black, like ink or oil or something worse, and she said, "He's ready now," and I screamed and tried to grab her, but she threw herself backward, down the stairs, like something pulled her, and when I ran down she was gone, no body, no blood, just the open front door and a cold wind and the attic door wide open again, and I knew if I went up there I'd see her, or what was left of her, but I couldn't move. I just stood there until the sun rose and the house finally let me leave, and I did. I ran barefoot into the street, screaming until a neighbor called the cops, and they didn't believe me. Of course they didn't. They went inside and came back out and said it was just an old house, nothing weird. But they didn't see the scratches on the inside of the closet door, or the teeth I found in the air vents, or the photo album full of people who'd lived there before, all of them looking more and more like me the longer I stared. And I don't know what happened to my parents. They were never found, just gone, like the house swallowed them too. But I do know this, the house still stands, still waits, and sometimes at night I dream of it, standing alone on that dead-end street, windows blinking like eyes, the attic door slowly opening, and my sister's voice whispering from the dark, "We're not done yet." And I wake up with splinters in my fingers and dust in my mouth, and once, just once, I swear I opened my eyes and saw the ceiling above me slanting wrong, like I'd somehow fallen back inside, like the house had stretched across space and time to reclaim what's its. And if that's true, if it can find me even now, then telling you this might have doomed you too, because now you've heard its name, now you've pictured the door, now you've imagined the stairs, And once you do, once you see it, it sees you too. Story 21. I've never told anyone what happened the year I turned 24 because saying it out loud makes it too real, and I've spent every day since trying to convince myself it was some kind of breakdown. Some hallucination brought on by stress or grief or whatever else lets me keep pretending I'm still normal, still safe. But the truth is I don't think I ever came back from that place, not really. And it started when I moved into that cheap rental on the edge of that dying little town nobody cares about. A place that smelled like mildew and dust and something else I didn't recognize at first, but now remember too clearly. The scent of wetwood and rotting earth and something underneath it all that reminded me of meat left out too long. And I told myself it was just old house funk, nothing special, that I could deal with the cracked walls and flickering lights and the way the doors never stayed shut even when you locked them. And I lived like that for a while, alone but not really lonely. Until the dreams started. And they weren't normal dreams, not like falling or flying or forgetting your pants. These were heavy and slow and cold. Dreams where I was buried underground and couldn't scream because my mouth was full of dirt. Dreams where something was waiting in the shadows of the hallway. Something that looked like me but taller and wrong and smiling in a way that felt like it had too many teeth. And I'd wake up every night at exactly 3:11 a.m., not in a panic, not sweating. Just aware, like something had just stepped out of the room a second before, leaving behind the smell of soil and iron and something burnt. And every time I walked past the mirror in the hallway after that, I'd catch glimpses of things behind me that weren't there when I turned around. Things that looked like figures standing still with their heads tilted at impossible angles or hands pressed flat against the wall, even though there was no one home but me. And then came the knocking, soft at first, like someone tapping one fingernail against glass, always at the window, even though I lived on the second floor, and then it got louder, harder. Fists pounding against the walls in the middle of the night until I'd jump out of bed with my heart racing and find nothing. No marks, no people, nothing but silence so heavy it felt like it had mass. Like if I breathed too loud it would collapse on me and crush my lungs. And one night I stayed up, just to see if it would happen while I was watching, and I wish to God I hadn't, because around 3:10 I heard breathing, not my own, something deep and ragged and wrong, like it was echoing from the inside of the walls. And then the door to the hallway creaked open on its own, and I saw myself standing there in the dark, but it wasn't me, it was taller, bones sharper, skin pale like wet paper, and it smiled and pointed at me and said my name, my full name, the way my mother used to when she was angry. And then it turned and walked away, and I sat frozen until morning, and after that things got worse fast, because I stopped being able to trust what I was seeing. I'd find doors in the house I didn't remember, closets where there hadn't been closets. One in particular under the stairs that hadn't been there before, but now appeared every time I blinked too long, and every time I opened it the inside was different, once full of moldy teeth, once full of dolls missing their faces, once full of boxes that shook like something was trapped inside, scratching to get out. And I started getting calls on my phone from my own number, always silent, just static and breathing, and once a voice that sounded like mine but warped, like it was underwater, whispering, "Let me back in." And I changed my number, smashed the phone, even left the house for a few days to stay with an old friend, but it followed me there too. I'd wake up in her guest room with bruises on my neck like fingers had been pressing down while I slept, and she swore up and down she never heard anything even though I was screaming. And eventually she asked me to leave because I was scaring her kids, and I don't blame her, not really, because by then I looked like hell. I couldn't sleep. I barely ate. My eyes were sunken, and my hair was falling out in clumps, and every time I looked in a mirror I saw that other version of me, just watching, just waiting, like it knew I couldn't hold out forever. And then one night I woke up and the hallway was filled with water, ice, cold and black and ankle deep and stretching on far longer than the house should have allowed. And I heard singing, a soft broken hum like someone remembering a lullaby they learned wrong. And at the end of the hall was a door that shouldn't exist, carved with symbols that hurt to look at. And when I blinked I was standing in front of it with my hand on the handle, and the singing was louder now, layered with whispers. And then I opened it and stepped through, and I can't tell you where I went. because it wasn't anywhere I recognize. It was like being inside a nightmare. All black sky and red ground and no horizon. Just endless hums and figures in the distance moving in ways that broke the rules of limbs and joints. And something came out of the dark toward me, fast, crawling upside down and backward and with eyes that never blinked. And it reached out and touched my face and said, "You let it in." And I woke up in my bed with mud on my feet and a key in my hand that I still have, but don't know what it opens. And ever since then I've never been the same. Time moves wrong around me. Sometimes I blink and it's hours later or days earlier. I hear voices under the floorboards calling for help or sometimes just laughing. And I see people on the street who look exactly like friends I haven't spoken to in years, but when I get close their eyes are gone and their mouths don't move when they speak. And I can't go near mirrors anymore because I caught mine moving on its own once. Just a slight twitch of the head before I did. And now it watches, always watches. And I know I didn't close that door right. I didn't lock it. And whatever was on the other side didn't stay behind. It followed me back. It's still here. And sometimes at night I feel it breathing under my bed. And when I check it's not there, but the mattress is warm like someone was just lying there. And I know one day I'll wake up and it'll be inside me, looking out through my eyes, walking around in my skin. And when that happens, no one will know. No one will realize that the thing talking and smiling and living isn't me anymore. But if you've heard this, if you're listening now, then maybe you'll notice when I stop blinking, when my smile is just a little too wide. And maybe then you'll understand why you should never go near that house, never open strange doors, never trust the things that look like you in the dark. Story 22. I've always known something was wrong with me, but it wasn't until the night I moved into that house that I understood just how deep the wrongness went, how it wasn't just me, but the place itself that was twisted, that was hungry. And I don't think I can ever shake the feeling that it's still out there, still waiting for me. Because when I moved into the house on Hemlock Avenue, it seemed perfect at first, or at least it was affordable, and I was desperate, living alone after years of being unable to keep a steady job, losing friends, losing time, feeling like I was always half present, never fully there. But the house, it felt like it should have been home. The old wooden floors creaked in the right ways. The peeling wallpaper gave it this vintage charm. And at first, I didn't think much of the odd drafts or the cold spots that wouldn't go away, even in the heat of summer. And when I opened the attic door for the first time, the stairs creaked beneath my weight as I climbed up into the dust and cobwebs. But that's where I found the first sign that something wasn't right, because the attic was full of things that didn't belong there. Old furniture covered in sheets, a rocking chair that seemed to sway slightly even though there was no wind, and a small trunk in the corner. But when I opened it, I found nothing but a stack of photographs, black and white images of families, all of them standing in front of the house, smiling. But their eyes were wrong. Their smiles stretched too wide, like they knew something I didn't, and every time I tried to throw the pictures out, they'd show back up, neatly stacked on the same trunk, and at night, I would hear footsteps in the hall outside my room, slow, deliberate, as if someone was pacing just out of view, and I'd wake up to see the floorboards at the foot of my bed creaking under the weight of someone who wasn't there, someone whose presence I could feel but never see. And the worst part was how everything in that house started to feel alive, like the walls were watching me. The windows were waiting for me to turn my back so they could shift slightly, as if they were trying to get closer. And then came the whispers, soft at first, just a murmur behind me when I was alone, too quiet to make out, but so close it felt like someone was breathing directly into my ear. And every time I turned around, there would be nothing, but that feeling, the feeling of being watched, lingered longer and longer. And when I thought I was finally going crazy, I found out I wasn't alone, not in the way I thought. Because one night while I was in the living room, the door slammed shut on its own, and I went to check the lock, but the door wasn't locked, and it wasn't the wind. And as I stood there staring at the door, I heard it scratching from behind it, a soft, relentless scratching, like claws against wood. And when I opened the door, there was nothing there but the cold and the feeling that something had been waiting for me to let my guard down. And that night, I dreamt of the family in the photographs, the family from the trunk, all of them sitting around a table, their faces twisted into these grotesque masks of joy and hunger, and the house. The house was alive in my dream too, the walls breathing in and out like lungs, the floorboards creaking underfoot as if they were shifting beneath my weight. And when I woke up, I felt different, like something had shifted inside me, like I was no longer the person who had moved in, but something else. And over the next few weeks, I felt it more and more, the pressure, the pull, the way my mind would slip away when I tried to focus, how the shadows seemed to grow longer the more I tried to ignore them. And the worst part was how everything in the house began to change. Things would appear in places they hadn't been before, photographs of people I didn't recognize, notes written in a language I couldn't read, objects that weren't mine. And one night, I woke up in the attic, not knowing how I'd gotten there, sitting on the floor staring at the trunk, and that's when I realized it was the trunk that was pulling me, because every time I tried to leave, every time I tried to run, my feet would carry me back to that attic, and I'd be drawn to that damn trunk. And I tried to burn the photographs, tried to throw them away, tried to destroy the trunk, but every time I did, they came back, always the same, smiling faces with eyes that knew, and I began to hear them, not just the whispers, but actual voices, low and guttural, calling my name in a way that made my skin crawl. And one night, in the dead of night, I opened the trunk again, and there, at the bottom, beneath all the photographs and dust, I found a small, rusted key, and when I held it in my hand, it felt like it was burning me, like it was made of fire and bone, and I didn't want to know what it opened, but the compulsion was too strong, and that night, I went back to the attic, my heart pounding in my chest as I placed the key in the lock of a door I hadn't noticed before, hidden behind a stack of old furniture, and when the door creaked open, I stepped into the dark, into a space that shouldn't have been there. A room that looked like it had been untouched for years, but as I stepped inside, I saw them, the family, their faces twisted and deformed, standing in the shadows, waiting for me, and before I could scream, before I could run, I felt something cold wrap around my ankle, and then everything went black, and I don't know how long I was unconscious, but when I woke up, I was back in my bed, like nothing had happened, but I knew it had. I could feel it. I could feel them still watching me, feel the house still breathing, and the worst part was how I wasn't sure if I had ever left that room, if I had ever escaped, and every day since, I feel it, that pressure, that weight, and every time I leave my house, I think the next person who moves in will hear the whispers too, will see the photographs, will find the key, and one day, they'll open that door, and they'll understand, just like I do, that once you step into that room, once you see those eyes, you're never free again, because the house owns you now. And I think it always did, from the moment I walked in. And I'm not sure if I'm alive anymore or if I've been taken already, but every time I look in the mirror, I swear I don't recognize the person staring back at me. And I know, deep down, that I've never really left that thing, that house. It's still with me, and it's waiting for the day when I'm weak enough to let it take me for good. Story 23. I never believed in ghosts, not really. Not until I moved into that house on Eldridge Lane, and I wish I had known better. I wish I had just walked away the first time I saw it. But the rent was cheap, and it was close to work, so I thought, what harm could it do, right? It was an old house, a big Victorian with peeling paint and warped floors, the kind of place that looked like it had seen better days, but I didn't mind. I loved old buildings, the creak of the wood, the drafty windows, all of it was comforting in a strange way, like being wrapped in something familiar. But soon after I moved in, I started to feel off. At first, it was small things, the door that wouldn't quite close all the way, the light in the hallway that flickered no matter how many bulbs I replaced, the strange chill that would roll through the house at night. But I told myself I was just adjusting to the new space. It wasn't anything to worry about. That was until the first night I heard it. That sound. Like someone walking around upstairs when I knew I was the only one there. So I went up to check, thinking it was just the house settling. But when I reached the top of the stairs, I felt a wave of cold so intense I couldn't breathe, and the air felt thick, heavy, like it was pressing down on me. And I didn't know why, but I felt like I wasn't alone. like someone else was watching me. And I walked down the hallway to the guest room where the sound had come from, but the room was empty, not a single thing disturbed. And I thought maybe I was just imagining things, maybe I was overtired, but the feeling didn't go away, it lingered. And over the next few days, things only got worse. I'd be sitting in the living room and hear footsteps behind me, soft but deliberate, the kind you can't ignore. And when I turned around, there would be nothing, no one, just empty air. And it made my skin crawl. And then the whispers started, low at first, just murmurs that I could barely make out, like someone was talking just out of earshot. But it wasn't anyone I knew, and they always seemed to come from the corners of the room, from places I wasn't looking. But when I turned my head to try to catch the words, they would stop. And then, one night, after weeks of this strange, creeping feeling, I woke up to the sound of someone crying, soft and broken, and it was coming from the attic. And at that moment, something inside me snapped. I didn't care if it was just my mind playing tricks on me anymore. I had to know. I had to see. So I grabbed a flashlight, opened the attic door, and climbed up into the dark. And the moment I stepped inside, the temperature dropped, and the air felt thick again, like walking through wet cotton. And I shone the light around the attic, and that's when I saw them. Photographs stacked neatly on an old wooden table of people I didn't recognize, all taken in front of the house, and their faces were wrong, twisted almost, like they were trying to smile but couldn't, like their mouths were stretched too wide, their eyes too hollow. And as I stared at them, I felt this sensation in my chest, a pressure that made it hard to breathe. And the flashlight flickered, and for a split second, the faces in the photographs changed. They looked like they were moving, and I blinked hard and the light came back on. But when I looked down at the photos again, they were still frozen in time, and I backed away, my heart racing. But then I heard it, a scraping sound behind me, slow, like nails dragging across wood. And I spun around, but there was nothing, nothing except the shadows that seemed to stretch longer than they should have been. And then the whispers started again, but this time they were clearer, more urgent. And I couldn't make out the words, but I knew they were calling my name. And I turned and ran out of the attic, slamming the door behind me. But the next night, the whispers came again, and this time they were louder, angrier, and I couldn't ignore them. They felt like they were in the walls, crawling behind the plaster. And then I noticed the cold spots, the places where the air felt like ice, and I would always find them in the same spots, by the front door, in the hallway, near the staircase. And I tried to tell myself it was just the house, that old buildings had drafts, but my mind kept going back to the pictures, the people in the attic, and the way they seemed to be staring at me, like they were waiting for something. And it wasn't long before I stopped sleeping, because every time I closed my eyes, I would hear the crying again, louder now, more desperate, and I would wake up in a cold sweat, feeling like I was suffocating. And that was when I realized the worst part. I wasn't the only one in the house anymore, and I don't know when it happened, but at some point, I started hearing footsteps that weren't mine, following me around, and sometimes they would be so close that I could feel the breath on my neck. But when I turned around, there was nothing, just empty air. And I knew that whatever was in this house with me wasn't human. It wasn't even alive. It was something else, something that was waiting for me, waiting to take me. And one night, I woke up to the sound of my front door creaking open, and I knew instantly it wasn't me, it wasn't anyone I knew. And I froze, barely breathing, as I heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming toward my bedroom. And when the door opened, I saw a figure standing in the doorway, tall and shadowed, its face hidden in darkness. And it didn't say anything. It just stood there, watching, and the room felt colder than it had ever been, colder than I thought was possible, and I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but stare as it took one step forward. And then, without warning, the door slammed shut. The figure was gone, and I was alone again. But I could feel it lingering just outside the door. And from that night on, I couldn't stay in that house, couldn't even look at it without feeling like something was pressing down on my chest. So I left. I packed up and drove away without ever looking back. But it didn't stop there, because every night since, I've heard the Whispers, I've heard the crying, and sometimes, when I'm walking home, I'll pass by houses that look like mine, just like it, with their creaky old doors and warped floors, and I swear I see those faces in the windows, staring at me, waiting for me to come back. And I know I'll never escape. I know that house will never let me go, and no matter where I go, it will follow. And sometimes, late at night, I hear those same footsteps behind me, the same slow, deliberate steps, and I can't shake the feeling that it's waiting for me to come back, waiting for me to open that door again. Story 24. I used to be the kind of person who never believed in the paranormal, who scoffed at people who claimed they saw ghosts or heard voices in the dead of night. I thought it was all in their heads, that there was always a rational explanation. But that was before I moved into the house on Larkspur Lane. And now, even though I tell myself it's all in my head, I can't shake the feeling that whatever is in that house with me isn't going away. Not ever. And I don't think I'll ever be the same again. Because when I first stepped foot inside that house, it seemed perfect, old, yes, but charming, with big windows and an overgrown garden, and the rent was affordable. So I thought it was my perfect opportunity to get away from the chaos of city life. Just a fresh start in a new place, a place I could call home. But within days of moving in, I began to notice things that didn't quite make sense, small things, like how the temperature would drop sharply in certain rooms, no matter how much I turned the heat up, and how the door to the basement would creak open at night, even though I knew I had locked it, and I told myself it was just the house settling, just old wooden walls that creaked in the wind. But then the noises started, the whispers. At first just a faint rustling sound, like someone was walking around just out of sight, and I thought it was the neighbors, maybe their kids running around or something, but there was no one there, and the whispers would come again the next night, louder, clearer, like someone was calling my name, and I would look around, check the doors and windows, but there was never anyone, nothing to explain the sounds, and then the shadows, those damn shadows, would start appearing, never quite in the right place, like they were moving on their own, shifting and flickering in the corners of my vision, and I would turn my head to catch them, but by the time I looked, they were gone, and I thought maybe I was just tired, maybe I was just imagining things, but I knew deep down that something wasn't right, something was wrong, and it wasn't just my imagination. And then came the dreams, terrible, vivid dreams where I was trapped in the house, unable to leave, no matter how hard I tried. And every time I looked in the mirrors, my reflection would be wrong, twisted, as if someone was standing just behind me, but when I would turn around, there would be nothing, and I would wake up in a cold sweat, heart racing, feeling like something was watching me from the darkness. And one night, while I was lying in bed, the floorboards creaked beneath me, like someone was walking upstairs, but I knew I was the only one in the house, and the sound came closer, step by step, until I could hear it right outside my bedroom door, slow, deliberate, and then it stopped, and I held my breath, waiting for something to happen, but nothing did, and the silence stretched on, unbearable, and I thought maybe I had imagined it. Maybe it was just the house settling again. But when I went to check the door, it was slightly ajar, and I didn't remember leaving it that way, and the air felt different, heavier, colder, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I stepped back, afraid to touch the door, afraid to open it. But eventually, I did, and there was nothing there, nothing but darkness, and I thought I was losing my mind, but that was just the beginning, because the next night, I woke up to the sound of crying, soft, desperate sobbing coming from the hallway, and when I went to investigate, I saw the silhouette of a figure standing at the end of the hallway, just out of reach of the dim light from the living room, and I called out, but it didn't move, just stood there. And I couldn't see its face, but I could feel it, the weight of its presence, and I didn't know what to do. I wanted to scream, but my voice was frozen, and before I could take another step, it disappeared into the darkness, and I thought it was a trick of the light, but deep down, I knew it wasn't, and after that night, things started to escalate. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, the shadows more frequent, and I started to see things that weren't there. Flashes of movement out of the corner of my eye, things that would be there 1 second and gone the next, and sometimes I would hear footsteps in the middle of the night, like someone was walking up and down the stairs, pacing, and I couldn't bring myself to check. Couldn't bring myself to look, but I knew something was in the house, something that didn't belong, and I couldn't escape it. And the worst part was that it wasn't just at night, it was during the day too, when I was sitting in the living room or cooking dinner. I would feel it, the pressure in the air, the sensation that someone was right behind me, breathing down my neck, and I would turn around quickly, but there was no one there, and I would tell myself I was being paranoid, but then came the night I will never forget, the night everything changed, because I woke up in the middle of the night to a loud bang, a crash that rattled the walls, and I leapt out of bed, heart racing, and I rushed to the source of the sound, the living room. But when I got there, everything was still, nothing was out of place. But as I looked around, I noticed something on the floor, a small trinket, something I didn't recognize, and when I picked it up, I realized it was an old key, rusted and worn. Like it had been buried for years, and I didn't know what it was for, but I knew I had to find out. So I started searching the house, every room, every closet, until I came to the attic, and that's when I saw it. The door, a door that had been there all along, hidden behind a stack of old furniture, and when I opened it, I felt the temperature drop, a coldness that seeped into my bones, and I stepped inside, shining my flashlight around, and I saw something in the corner, something I couldn't quite make out, but I could feel it, feel its eyes on me. And then I heard the whisper, clear as day, right behind me, leave, and I spun around, but there was no one there, just darkness, and I backed away, terrified, and that's when I saw it. A figure in the far corner, standing motionless, its face obscured by the shadows, and I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, as it stepped forward, slowly, and then it spoke again, this time in a voice that was low and guttural. You shouldn't have come. And I ran as fast as I could, out of that attic, down the stairs, and I didn't stop until I was out the door, but when I turned back to look at the house, I saw the silhouette of something standing in the window, watching me, and I haven't been back since. But every night, I hear the whispers, I hear the footsteps, and sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see that figure in the shadows, waiting, and I know that whatever it was, it's still there, still waiting for me, and it's only a matter of time before it comes back for me. And I'm afraid that I'll never be able to escape, because I don't think it wants to let me go, not ever. Story 25. I've always been the kind of person who doesn't easily get spooked. I grew up in a small town, the kind where everyone knows your name and nothing ever really happens. And I always thought the idea of haunted houses and ghosts was just for the movies. Something to scare little kids or make a good story at a campfire. But I can tell you now that I was wrong, dead wrong. And I'll never think the same way again after what happened when I moved into that house on Winchester Street. I didn't know much about it at first, just that it was a bit old and needed some work, but it was cheap. And I had just gotten a new job and thought it was a good opportunity to live somewhere closer to work. The house was an old two-story with a big backyard and a porch that creaked when you stepped on it. But I didn't mind that. I thought it added character, and for the first few days, everything was fine. Or at least I convinced myself it was. But then, around the fourth night, I woke up to a noise, soft. At first, like a whisper, almost like someone was talking, and I figured it was just the wind, or maybe the house settling. But then it came again, louder this time, unmistakable, and I sat up in bed, listening, my heart starting to race. And I could hear someone saying my name, Emily, and I froze, not knowing whether I should get up and check or just ignore it. But I knew I wasn't imagining it. It was too real, too clear, and I got out of bed slowly, my feet cold on the wooden floor, and I walked toward the hallway, and as I did, the air around me seemed to thicken, like it was hard to breathe, and I thought maybe I was just tired, maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. But the closer I got to the living room, the louder the whispers became. And when I turned the corner, I froze. There, in the middle of the living room, was a figure, standing still in the darkness, its shape barely visible, and I couldn't move, couldn't speak, just stood there staring at it, and it was like time slowed down. The air was cold colder than it should have been for a summer night, and I wanted to run, wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I just stood there, watching this thing that didn't belong, and then it turned its head slowly, and I saw its eyes, black as pitch, empty, hollow, and I felt a chill run through me, one that reached deep into my bones, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what it was, but I felt like it was staring straight into my soul, like it was waiting for something. And finally, I turned and ran back to my bedroom, slamming the door behind me and locked it. But I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every creak of the floorboards made my heart jump, and I could hear the whispers again, like they were right outside my door. And the next morning, I tried to convince myself that it had been a dream, that I was just imagining things. But deep down, I knew it wasn't, and over the next few days, things only got worse. I started hearing footsteps when no one was around, faint, soft, like someone was walking upstairs, and when I went to check, there was no one there. But the air always felt colder when I walked through the hallway, and the whispers were constant now, and they weren't just at night anymore, during the day. When I was sitting at my kitchen table, I could hear them, faint at first, but growing louder, always calling my name, and it made it hard to focus, hard to think, and I started losing track of time, days blending together, and I couldn't escape the feeling that something was always watching me. And then came the dreams. They were vivid, terrifying, and I always woke up sweating, heart racing. But no matter how much I tried to push them away, they would come again every single night in these dreams. I would find myself standing in the living room, facing the same shadowed figure, and every time I would try to move, try to scream, I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't even breathe, and I was paralyzed. And the figure would always take a step closer, its hollow eyes fixed on me, and I could feel it closing in on me, and one night, after weeks of this, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers. I had to know what was going on. So I started looking into the history of the house, but what I found only made things worse, because this house, the one I was living in, had a past, a dark one, a history of deaths, disappearances, people who had lived there and never been seen again, and I found a newspaper article about a woman who had lived there years before me, a woman named Margaret, who had vanished without a trace, and her body was never found. And when I looked into the people who had lived there before, I saw a pattern. All of them had some kind of connection to the house. All of them had suffered some kind of tragedy or death, and I started to piece it together. Started to realize that whatever was in that house wasn't just a ghost. It was something else, something older, something that had been there long before I ever moved in. And I could feel its presence growing stronger with each passing day. And then the unexplainable things started happening. The doors would open and close on their own. Things would move from one place to another when no one was there. And I could hear faint footsteps on the stairs when I knew no one was home. And sometimes I would wake up in the middle of the night to find the lights on in the kitchen, even though I was sure I had turned them off before bed. And one night, I woke up to the sound of something scratching at the walls, like claws, like something was trying to get in. And I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. And then, finally, it happened, the worst of it, because one night, while I was sitting in the living room, trying to convince myself that I was just imagining things, that it was all in my head, the lights flickered, and the air grew heavy, and I heard it again, the whisper, but this time, it was louder, clearer, and when I turned to look, I saw it, standing right in front of me, that same figure, but this time, its face was clear, and its eyes were staring straight at me, and I could hear it speak, its voice low and raspy, like the sound of dry leaves being crushed underfoot, and it said, "You should have left when you had the chance." And that was the moment I knew I had to leave, that there was no other choice. So I packed up everything I could, everything that mattered, and I left that house. But even now, after all this time, I still hear the whispers. I still feel that cold, suffocating presence, and sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can still see its face, those hollow, dark eyes watching me from the shadows. And I know that no matter where I go, it will follow me, because whatever was in that house, whatever it was, it's still with me, and I don't think it will ever let me go. Story 26. I never believed in anything supernatural, in ghosts or curses or anything like that growing up. I always dismissed it all as the product of people's imaginations or bad dreams. But that was before I moved into the old house on Blackstone Avenue, a place I couldn't have known would change my life forever. I'd found the house through an old ad in the newspaper. It wasn't the best place, but it was cheap, and I needed somewhere to live after my recent breakup. I needed to be alone, and this house seemed like the perfect opportunity to get some space, to start over. It was a little rundown, the lawn overgrown and the shutters hanging loose, but it had character, and I figured a little elbow grease would make it homey again. And for the first few days, it felt like any other place. I'd unpacked, settled in, and didn't think much of the creaks and groans of the house settling. But then one night, the noise started, just a faint sound at first, like something scratching against the walls, and I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just the old house, the wind or something, but the sound didn't stop. It grew louder, more persistent, and it wasn't just in the walls anymore. It started coming from the attic, the floorboards creaking, like someone was up there, walking around, and I couldn't explain it, and I was terrified, but I convinced myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But then came the whispers, at first just a breath of sound, barely audible, but as the days went on, they grew louder, more distinct, and I would hear them when I was alone in the house, when I would sit on the couch, or when I was in the kitchen making dinner. They were always the same, calling my name, Maggie, and I'd try to brush it off, thinking it was the wind or the house settling again. But then it happened one night. I was in bed, and I heard the whispers again, clear as day, right next to me, and I froze, my heart pounding in my chest, and I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, and I tried to look around the room, but there was nothing there, nothing but darkness, and I told myself it was just a nightmare. But when I woke up the next morning, I found something strange, a small piece of paper lying on the floor next to my bed. And it was old, yellowed with age, and when I picked it up, I saw that it had words written on it in a neat, careful hand, and the words sent a chill down my spine. You should leave now. And I thought it was a joke, maybe from the previous tenants or something left behind by the landlord. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, that this wasn't just some random thing. But when I looked around the house, everything seemed normal. And I tried to convince myself that I was overreacting, that it was just a weird coincidence. But the whispers didn't stop. They were there every night, always calling my name. And I tried to ignore it, tried to go to sleep. But it got worse. The house seemed colder at night, the air heavy, oppressive, and I started having nightmares, vivid, terrifying dreams where I was trapped in the house, unable to leave, and when I would wake up, I would feel like I wasn't alone, like something was watching me, following me. And one night, I decided to do something about it. I couldn't keep living like this, so I went up to the attic to look around, to see if maybe there was something in the house that I hadn't noticed, something that could explain the noises and the whispers. And when I opened the attic door, the smell hit me first, a musty, decaying scent, like something had been rotting up there for years, and I stepped inside, shining my flashlight around, and that's when I saw it, at the far end of the attic. A large wooden trunk, and it was old, covered in dust, and there was something about it that made my skin crawl. I don't know why, but I felt like I had to open it, like I was drawn to it. So I approached it slowly, my hands shaking as I reached for the latch, and when I opened it, I immediately regretted it, because inside was a pile of old clothes, covered in a thick layer of dust, and buried underneath them, there was a small wooden box, intricately carved with symbols that I couldn't recognize, and I hesitated for a moment, but my curiosity got the better of me, and I reached for it, and when I touched it, I felt a shock, like electricity running through my fingertips. And I pulled my hand back, but it felt like something was urging me to open it. So I did, and inside was a small, faded photograph, and when I looked at it, my blood ran cold, because it was a picture of a woman standing in front of the house, but she was staring directly into the camera, her eyes wide and vacant, and there was something about her expression, something unsettling, like she wasn't really there. And on the back of the photograph, In the same careful handwriting as the note from before were the words, "She never left," and my heart stopped. I dropped the photograph, the box, and backed away, but the whispers started again, louder this time, more insistent, and when I turned around, I saw her, standing in the doorway, that same woman from the photograph, her eyes hollow, her skin pale and stretched tight over her bones, and I could feel the temperature drop, a chill that cut straight through me, and I tried. Story 26. I never believed in anything supernatural, in ghosts or curses or anything like that. Growing up, I always dismissed it all as the product of people's imaginations or bad dreams. But that was before I moved into the old house on Blackstone Avenue, a place I couldn't have known would change my life forever. I'd found the house through an old ad in the newspaper. It wasn't the best place, but it was cheap, and I needed somewhere to live after my recent breakup. I needed to be alone, and this house seemed like the perfect opportunity to get some space, to start over. It was a little rundown, the lawn overgrown and the shutters hanging loose, but it had character, and I figured a little elbow grease would make it homey again. And for the first few days, it felt like any other place. I'd unpacked, settled in, and didn't think much of the creaks and groans of the house settling. But then one night, the noise started, just a faint sound at first, like something scratching against the walls, and I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just the old house, the wind or something, but the sound didn't stop. It grew louder, more persistent, and it wasn't just in the walls anymore. It started coming from the attic, the floorboards creaking, like someone was up there, walking around, and I couldn't explain it, and I was terrified, but I convinced myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But then came the whispers, at first just a breath of sound, barely audible, but as the days went on, they grew louder. Story 27. I never thought much about the supernatural, never put stock in ghost stories or haunted houses. I thought it was all just urban legends, stuff people made up to scare kids or entertain themselves. But that changed the night I moved into the old house on Oak Ridge Drive. I didn't know it at the time, but that house had a history, a dark and twisted history that would eventually consume me. And it all started innocently enough, with a simple move-in. I had just started a new job in the city, needed a place to stay, and when I saw the house listed online, I was intrigued. It wasn't perfect, the paint was chipped, the garden was overgrown, but the price was right, and it had a charm to it. So I signed the lease and moved in without a second thought. The first few days were uneventful. I unpacked my things, got to know the neighborhood a little. Everything seemed normal, but then came the silence. It wasn't like the usual quiet of a suburban neighborhood. It was an oppressive, heavy silence, like the air itself was thick and suffocating. And at night, when I would lie in bed, I could hear faint noises from the walls, scratching sounds, like something small and sharp was moving around behind them. And at first, I thought it was just the house settling. Old buildings have their quirks, right? But as the days went on, the noises didn't stop. They only got worse, louder, and I started hearing whispers, soft, indistinct voices, like people talking just outside my door. But when I would open it, there would be no one there, just the same empty hallway. And I tried to shake it off, told myself I was imagining things, that I was just lonely. But then one night, it happened. I was sitting on the couch watching TV when I heard a loud bang from upstairs, like something heavy had fallen to the floor, and I immediately froze, my heart racing, because there was no one up there. I was alone. I hadn't touched anything, and yet there it was, unmistakable. So I stood up slowly, my body stiff with fear, and I made my way upstairs, my footsteps echoing in the silence. And when I reached the top, the air felt colder, and the hallway seemed to stretch on forever, like it was pulling me deeper into its dark corners. And when I reached the first room, I saw it, a door slightly ajar, and through the crack, I could see the outline of something moving, something shifting in the dark, and my breath caught in my throat as I stepped closer. And the moment I touched the door, it swung open violently, and I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. And I could hear the whispering again, but this time it was clearer, louder, like it was coming from inside the room, and I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to run, wanted to leave that house and never come back. But another part of me, the part that was still holding on to my disbelief, urged me to step inside to see for myself that there was nothing to fear. So I did, and the room was empty, save for an old rocking chair in the corner, and as soon as I stepped inside, the chair began to rock back and forth, slowly at first, then faster, and I could feel my blood run cold as I realized the whispers had stopped, and in their place was a deep, guttural growl, like something inhuman, something old and powerful, and I backed out of the room, slamming the door behind me, and I didn't know what to think, but I couldn't deny what had just happened, and from that moment on, the house was never the same. The whispers became constant, and I began to see things. Shadows moving in the corners of my vision, figures standing in the hallway, always out of reach, but when I would turn to look directly at them, they would vanish, and sometimes, when I would wake up in the middle of the night, I would hear someone crying. Soft, heart-wrenching sobs, coming from somewhere deep within the walls, and I couldn't take it anymore. I started looking into the history of the house, hoping to find an explanation, hoping it was all just some weird coincidence. But what I found only made things worse, because this house, this place, had been the site of multiple deaths, unexplained disappearances, and countless other strange occurrences, and as I dug deeper, I discovered that the house had once belonged to a family that had vanished without a trace, leaving behind nothing but their belongings and a strange, lingering presence. And when I found the name of the last tenant, a woman named Evelyn, I felt a chill crawl down my spine, because the more I read, the more I realized that Evelyn had been the last person to live there before me, and she had gone missing under mysterious circumstances, and no one had ever been able to explain what happened to her. But what struck me the most was a small detail. In the article, Story 27, I never thought much about the supernatural, never put stock in ghost stories or haunted houses. I thought it was all just urban legends, stuff people made up to scare kids or entertain themselves. But that changed the night I moved into the old house on Oak Ridge Drive. I didn't know it at the time, but that house had a history, a dark and twisted history that would eventually consume me. And it all started innocently enough, with a simple move-in. I had just started a new job in the city, needed a place to stay, and when I saw the house listed online, I was intrigued. It wasn't perfect, the paint was chipped, the garden was overgrown, but the price was right, and it had a charm to it. So I signed the lease and moved in without a second thought. The first few days were uneventful. I unpacked my things, got to know the neighborhood a little. Everything seemed normal, but then came the silence. It wasn't like the usual quiet of a suburban neighborhood. It was an oppressive, heavy silence, like the air itself was thick and suffocating. And at night, when I would lie in bed, I could hear faint noises from the walls, scratching sounds, like something small and sharp was moving around behind them. And at first, I thought it was just the house settling. Old buildings have their quirks, right? But as the days went on, the noises didn't stop. They only got worse, louder, and I started hearing whispers, soft, indistinct voices, like people talking just outside my door. But when I would open it, there would be no one there, just the same empty hallway. And I tried to shake it off, told myself I was imagining things, that I was just lonely. But then one night, it happened. I was sitting on the couch watching TV when I heard a loud bang from upstairs, like something heavy had fallen to the floor, and I immediately froze, my heart racing, because there was no one up there. I was alone. I hadn't touched anything, and yet there it was, unmistakable. So I stood up slowly, my body stiff with fear, and I made my way upstairs, my footsteps echoing in the silence. And when I reached the top, the air felt colder, and the hallway seemed to stretch on forever, like it was pulling me deeper into its dark corners. And when I reached the Story 28, I never believed in ghosts, spirits, or anything remotely supernatural. I was always the type of person to dismiss strange noises as just the house settling or my imagination running wild, and for most of my life, that served me well. Especially when I moved into the old Victorian house on Willow Street, an antique beauty with creaky floors, grandiose windows, and that slightly eerie feeling that comes with living in a house that's seen better days, and at first, I thought it was perfect, even. Though the rent was unusually cheap, something about the place felt welcoming, even with the faded wallpaper and overgrown ivy crawling up the outside walls. But I didn't think much of it. After all, I needed a place to live, and the location was ideal. So I moved in, unpacked, and started my new chapter. But that's when it started. The noises, faint at first, like the rustling of papers or footsteps overhead when no one was there. And I thought it was just the house settling again, because old houses have a way of doing that, right? But then, a few nights later, as I lay in bed, I heard something more distinct, like something or someone scraping along the floor. And it wasn't like any sound I'd heard before. It was a slow, deliberate drag, as if someone was dragging a heavy object across the floor. And I bolted upright, heart hammering in my chest, my eyes scanning the room. But there was nothing, just the shadows and the flickering streetlight outside casting strange shapes on the walls. And I told myself it was the house. Again, the old wood making strange noises in the night. But the next night, the sound came again, louder, closer, and I knew it wasn't my imagination. And that's when I started feeling it, a presence, cold and heavy, like something was watching me, standing just at the edge of my vision. And when I tried to ignore it, it only grew worse. The air in the house grew colder, and the whispers began, soft at first, almost like a breeze, but they carried with them an unmistakable malice, and I'd wake, up in the middle of the night, my heart racing, to hear someone whispering my name, just on the edge of hearing, and it would send a chill down my spine every time, but I couldn't find the source, and it felt like the house was alive, like it was breathing. And I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that there was something else in there with me, something that had been waiting for me. And I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, that I was just stressed from the move, or maybe the old house just had some strange quirks. But I couldn't ignore it anymore when I started seeing the shadows. At first, I thought they were just tricks of the light, but the longer I stayed in that house, the more I noticed them. Figures that moved when I wasn't looking, shapes that seemed to hover in the corners of my eyes, and they would disappear when I turned to face them, like they were trying to get my attention. But I didn't want to look. I was too scared, and one night, I decided to do something about it. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know what was causing the noises and the whispers, so I made my way to the attic, the one place I hadn't dared to go yet. And when I opened the door, a gust of cold air rushed past me, carrying with it the faint smell of something rotten, and I stepped inside, shining my flashlight around the cluttered space, and that's when I saw it, an old trunk sitting in the far corner, covered in dust, the metal latch tarnished with age, and I felt drawn to it, like something inside was calling to me. So I approached cautiously, my heart pounding, and when I touched the latch, I felt a jolt of electricity run through my fingers, sharp and painful, and I jerked my hand back. But I couldn't stop myself. I opened it, and inside was a pile of old, tattered books and yellowed papers. But underneath it all, there was something strange, a small, wooden box, intricately carved with symbols I didn't recognize, and when I picked it up, it felt unnaturally cold, like it had been buried in ice for years, and I couldn't explain why, but I knew I had to open it. So I did, and inside was a single piece of paper, aged and fragile, and when I unfolded it, I felt my blood run cold. Because the paper was covered in handwriting, scrawled in frantic, messy strokes, and the words sent a chill straight to my bones. She's still here. She won't leave. She'll never let you go. And I dropped the paper in shock, my mind racing as I tried to make sense of it. But it didn't make any sense. Who was she? And why did it feel like the house was reacting to the paper, to my discovery? But before I could think further, I heard it, the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving across the floor below me, and I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. Because I was alone, I was absolutely alone, and the footsteps continued. Closer now, coming up the stairs, and I backed into the corner of the attic, my breath coming in ragged gasps, and I watched in horror as the attic door slowly creaked open, and there, standing in the doorway, was a figure, a woman, but her eyes were empty, hollow pits, her skin pale and stretched too tight. And she smiled at me, a smile that wasn't human, it was something more sinister, and I tried to scream, but no sound came out, and she reached for me, her hands long and bony, and I couldn't move, couldn't escape, and when she touched me, I felt a coldness seep into my skin, like her touch was draining the warmth from my body, and I couldn't breathe, I couldn't move, and then, as quickly as it had begun, it stopped, and I was alone. Again, the woman gone, but I knew, deep down, that I wasn't alone, not really, not anymore. And the next morning, I woke up with a feeling of dread in the pit of my stomach, and as I looked in the mirror, I saw her reflection, standing just behind me. Her hollow eyes staring right at me, and I ran. I left the house. I couldn't stay there another minute. But when I tried to pack my things, the doors wouldn't open. The windows were locked tight, and I realized, with growing terror, that I was trapped, that whatever was in that house wouldn't let me leave, and the whispers started again, louder now, more insistent, and every time I tried to escape, every time I thought I was free, I found myself back in that same house. And I realized too late that once you enter Willow Street, you can never leave, not truly, because something in that house claims you, something that waits for the right moment, and when you're finally broken, it takes you, and you become part of its dark history. Just another soul lost to the shadows. Story 29. I had never been one to believe in the supernatural, at least not until I moved into the old farmhouse on the outskirts of town, a place that was more like a relic from another time, with its creaking wood floors, sagging roof, and a yard that seemed to swallow up the sun, making it look perpetually dreary and cold. But I was desperate for a place to live, and the rent was cheap. And at first, it seemed like the perfect escape from the hustle and bustle of city life. So I didn't question it, and the first few days went by like any other move, unpacking boxes, getting used to the layout, and setting up a routine. But then came the first night, when I lay in bed listening to the sounds of the house, the odd groans and shifts of the old wood, sounds I had heard in other places before. But that night, something felt off, like the house was too quiet, the air too still, and when I got up to grab some water from the kitchen, I noticed something strange. The floorboards near the back door were disturbed, as if someone had walked across them. But I was alone, and that's when the unease started to grow, and over the next few days, I began to notice little things, like objects being moved when I was sure I hadn't touched them, or the doors in the house creaking open when I was sure I had closed them. And at first, I chalked it up to being forgetful or distracted, but then the whispers started, soft at first, like the wind brushing against the walls, but they were distinct, as if someone was speaking just out of my line of sight. And it wasn't until one evening when I was sitting in the living room, reading a book, that I heard them clearly, the whispers calling my name, just barely audible, but enough to make the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, and I called out, thinking maybe it was the wind or a stray animal outside. But no one answered, and I shook it off. But the next night, it happened again, and the whispers became more insistent, almost urgent, and I started feeling like I wasn't alone in the house, like something was watching me, something in the corners of my vision, something that was always just out of reach, and when I tried to sleep, I would feel the bed shift, as if someone was sitting at the edge. But when I turned on the light, there was nothing there, and this went on for days, the whispers, the shifting, the feeling of being watched, and no matter how much I told myself it was all in my head, I couldn't shake the sense that something was terribly wrong. And then one night, after I had been laying in bed for hours, unable to sleep, I heard it, a soft tapping at the window, like fingernails lightly drumming against the glass, and when I glanced out into the dark yard, I saw nothing but the shadows of trees swaying in the breeze, but the tapping continued, rhythmic, almost like a beckoning, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to investigate. So I threw on a jacket and stepped outside into the cold night air, the darkness swallowing me as I walked toward the back of the house, where the tapping seemed to be coming from. And that's when I saw it, a figure standing in the yard, barely visible in the moonlight, but it was there, unmoving, staring at me. And my heart skipped a beat as I froze, unable to move, unable to breathe, and I called out, but the figure didn't respond, It just stood there, silent, and as I took a step forward, it disappeared, vanishing into the night as if it had never been there at all. And I rushed back into the house, locking the door behind me, but the sense of dread didn't leave, it only grew stronger, and the next morning, I decided to do some research on the house, thinking maybe there was an explanation, maybe someone had died here, or there was some sort of tragic history that could explain what I was experiencing. And as I dug deeper, I discovered that the house had once belonged to a family that had vanished without a trace years ago, and there were rumors, whispers, really, that the family had been involved in some sort of occult practices, that they had been trying to contact the other side, but something had gone horribly wrong, and they had disappeared, leaving nothing behind but a few scattered belongings and a house full of empty rooms. And as I read more, I realized with growing horror that the figure I had seen in the yard, the whispers, the strange occurrences, they weren't coincidences. They weren't just my imagination, they were connected to whatever had happened to the family, to the dark energy that had been left behind. And I felt a cold dread settle in my chest as I realized that I was now a part of this history, that whatever had been unleashed in that house was now after me. And from that point on, it got worse. The whispers became louder, the tapping more frequent, and I began to see things, shadows in the corners of my eyes, figures moving in the dark, always just out of sight. And one night, I woke up to find the door to my bedroom wide open, the floorboards creaking as if someone was walking around outside my room. And when I looked out into the hallway, I saw it, a figure, standing motionless in the dark, its face obscured by the shadows. But I could feel its eyes on me, staring, waiting, and I tried to scream, but no sound came out, and I backed into the corner of my room, my heart racing, and then it moved, slowly at first, and then faster, coming toward me with an unnatural, jerking motion. And I ran down the stairs and out of the house, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I stumbled through the yard. But no matter how far I went, no matter how much I tried to escape, I couldn't get away, and it followed me, its presence like a weight on my chest. And when I finally stopped to catch my breath, I looked back at the house, and I saw it, an outline in the window, a figure standing there, watching me, and I knew, without a doubt, that I was never going to escape, that I would always be a part of that house now. And as I turned to run again, I heard the whispers, louder now, as if they were calling my name, and I realized, with sickening clarity, that the house wasn't just haunted, it was alive, and it wanted me, and I would never be free of it. Story 30. I used to be a skeptic when it came to things like ghosts and the supernatural. I was always the one rolling my eyes when friends or family told stories about haunted houses or eerie experiences, brushing it off as overactive imaginations or simple coincidences. So when I moved into the old house at the end of Birchwood Lane, I never once thought that I was walking into something far darker than I could ever comprehend. A house that had been empty for years, a place that had a reputation for being a little too quiet, a little too still. And when I first laid eyes on it, I was struck by how worn it looked, like time had been eating away at it, with ivy crawling up the sides and the porch steps sagging beneath the weight of age. But it was affordable, and I needed a place to stay, so I signed the lease without a second thought. And I remember the first night there, the stillness of the air around me, as if the house was holding its breath. And I thought it was just because I was in an unfamiliar place, and the creaks of the floorboards underfoot as I moved through the house seemed normal, almost comforting, a reminder that the house was still alive in its own way. But as the days passed, things started to get weird. At first it was subtle, little things like the light fixtures flickering when there was no reason for them to, or the feeling of being watched when no one was around. But I told myself I was just adjusting to the place, that it was an old house, and old houses tend to settle and groan. But then came the first strange noise, a soft scratching, like claws running along the floor, and it came from upstairs, where no one had been, and I froze in place, heart pounding, thinking maybe it was an animal that had gotten in through the walls or attic. But when I checked, there was nothing there, no sign of anything that could explain the noise, and I chalked it up to the house's quirks, trying to ignore the growing feeling that something wasn't right. But then, the whispers started, faint at first, just barely audible, like the wind passing through the cracks of the house. And I told myself that it was just the old wood shifting. But as the whispers became clearer, more distinct, I couldn't deny it anymore. I would hear my name being called in a voice that didn't belong to me, always from a different room. But when I went to check, there was no one there. And every time I would feel that creeping sensation that someone was standing just behind me, breathing down my neck. And I would whip around, expecting to find someone, anyone. But there was never anyone there, just the empty walls and silence. And it was like the house itself was alive, its energy twisting and turning, reaching out to me. And I started hearing footsteps at night, slow, heavy steps that seemed to echo from the hallway. And when I would check, there was no one there, no trace of anyone walking through the house. But the sound would continue. Sometimes it would sound like they were coming from the basement, other times from the attic. And no matter where I went, it felt like something was always just out of sight. And then, one night, as I lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, the whispers started again. But this time, they were louder, more insistent, and I could hear them coming from just outside my bedroom door. And when I got up to open it, I was met with darkness, just the long, empty hallway stretching out in front of me. And as I stepped into the hallway, I felt the temperature drop, a coldness settling over me that seemed to seep into my bones. And I knew, somehow, that I wasn't alone, that whatever had been whispering my name was still there, just beyond my sight. And I turned to head back to my room. But that's when I heard it, a low, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards, and I froze in place, unable to move, unable to breathe. And as I stood there, paralyzed with fear, I saw it, a shadow, dark and shapeless, moving toward me, its form shifting and contorting in ways that defied logic. And I couldn't look away, couldn't tear my eyes from it as it came closer. And I knew then that it wasn't just a figment of my imagination. It was real, and whatever it wasn't friendly. And just as it reached out to me, I felt a sharp pain in my chest, like icy fingers wrapping around my heart, and I stumbled back, my breath coming in gasps. But the shadow didn't stop. It followed me, its presence pressing against me like a weight. And I ran. I ran as fast as I could, tearing down the stairs and out the front door. But when I looked back, the house was standing there, silent, unmoving, but I knew it wasn't empty, not anymore. And I spent that night outside, not daring to go back inside, even as the sun began to rise. And when morning came, I went back into the house, thinking maybe I had imagined it, that the night's events had been a product of my fear. But when I stepped through the door, the air was thick, suffocating, and the house felt colder, darker, like something was waiting, and I felt it immediately, the weight of something that wasn't human. And I started hearing the whispers again, louder now, more frantic. And when I walked into the living room, I saw them, 3 figures standing in the corner, their faces pale and twisted, eyes hollow and unblinking, and they just stared at me, unmoving, their mouths stretching into twisted smiles that didn't reach their eyes. And I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, and I tried to run, tried to escape. But no matter how fast I ran, no matter where I went, the house never let me leave. And every time I thought I was free, I would find myself back in that same room, back in that same house, with the shadows and the whispers, and the figures would always be there, waiting, watching. And I realized then that I was trapped, that the house had claimed me, and no matter how far I ran, I would never escape, because whatever was inside that house had no intention of letting me go, and it wouldn't stop until it had everything. And I was nothing but another soul lost to the darkness. And as the whispers became screams and the shadows reached for me, I knew that I was never going to leave this place, not alive, not sane. Story 31. I never believed in the supernatural, Not even when I moved into the old house on the edge of town, one of those places with peeling paint, overgrown ivy, and a front yard that seemed to sag beneath the weight of time itself. But I was desperate for a place to stay. My life had hit a point where I couldn't afford anything better, and when I saw the sign for rent, I was relieved. The price was right, and even though people had warned me about it, calling it unlucky, I thought they were just superstitious, and the first night I stayed there, I felt a strange calm settle over me as I unpacked my things, the house groaning and creaking with every movement I made. But it felt like a peaceful kind of noise, the kind you'd expect from an old house settling after years of silence, and for a while, everything was normal, or at least I convinced myself it was, even though I noticed small things that didn't quite make sense. Like how the floors always felt colder in certain rooms, or how the air seemed thick with something, a presence that made it hard to breathe. But I told myself it was just because the house was old and drafty, and I was just getting used to the new place. And the first real sign that something was off came a few days later. When I woke up in the middle of the night, my chest tight with fear, as if I wasn't alone, and when I opened my eyes, the room was pitch black, but I could hear something soft, almost like whispers, coming from somewhere just outside my door, and it wasn't clear enough to make out any words, but it was enough to make my heart race. And when I tried to get up and check, my body felt like it was stuck in place, like there was a weight pressing down on me, and I couldn't move, couldn't scream. And all I could do was listen as the whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they were right next to my ear. And just as I thought I was going to lose my mind from the terror of not knowing what it was, the voices stopped, and the pressure lifted, and I found myself gasping for air, trembling uncontrollably, and I thought it must have been a dream, just a nightmare. But the next night, the whispers came back, and this time, they weren't so soft, they were clearer, and they called my name. A voice that didn't belong to anyone I knew, and I tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself it was just the wind. But the next morning, I noticed something else, something I hadn't seen before, a small mark on the wall above the bed. A scratch, like something had clawed its way across the surface, and as I looked closer, I noticed more scratches in the wood of the doorframe and in the corners of the room, and I realized with growing dread that they weren't random, they formed patterns, intricate, deliberate, and I couldn't help but wonder if something or someone had been here before. And over the next few days, the house became stranger. Doors that I was sure I'd locked would be wide open when I came back to my room. Dishes would be moved, and things that I hadn't touched would be scattered across the floor. And it wasn't long before the house started to feel like it was alive, its very walls closing in on me. And then came the night that changed everything. When I was sitting in the living room, trying to relax, when I heard something heavy dragging across the floor above me, slow, deliberate, as if someone or something was crawling across the ceiling. And it wasn't like the normal creaks of the house. It was something else, something heavier, and my heart skipped a beat when the dragging sound stopped. And then came the footsteps, slow and measured, walking toward the edge of the ceiling above me, and I froze, not daring to move. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, I heard a loud thud, like something heavy had fallen, and I leapt to my feet, rushing to the stairs. But when I reached the top, I found nothing, no sign of anything that could explain what I just heard, and I checked the attic, but it was empty, dust and cobwebs hanging in the air, and I thought maybe I was losing my mind. Maybe the stress of moving had gotten to me. But that night, when I tried to sleep, I felt it again, the weight pressing down on my chest, the feeling of someone standing just behind me, and I could hear breathing, slow, deep, in my ear, and I couldn't move, couldn't scream, and just as I thought I was going to suffocate under the pressure, the breathing stopped, and I could finally move, and I ran from the room, rushing downstairs, only to find the front door wide open, even though I was sure I'd locked it, and I didn't hesitate. I bolted out into the night, running away from the house, away from the feeling that something was following me, and when I came back the next morning, the house seemed quiet again, almost too quiet, and I thought maybe. Story 31. I never believed in the supernatural, not even when I moved into the old house on the edge of town. One of those places with peeling paint, overgrown ivy, and a front yard that seemed to sag beneath the weight of time itself. But I was desperate for a place to stay. My life had hit a point where I couldn't afford anything better, and when I saw the sign for rent, I was relieved. The price was right, and even though people had warned me about it, calling it unlucky, I thought they were just superstitious. And the first night I stayed there, I felt a strange calm settle over me as I unpacked my things, the house groaning and creaking with every movement I made. But it felt like a peaceful kind of noise, the kind you'd expect from an old house settling after years of silence. And for a while, everything was normal, or at least I convinced myself it was, even though I noticed small things that didn't quite make sense. Like how the floors always felt colder in certain rooms, or how the air seemed thick with something, a presence that made it hard to breathe. But I told myself it was just because the house was old and drafty, and I was just getting used to the new place. And the first real sign that something was off came a few days later. When I woke up in the middle of the night, my chest tight with fear, as if I wasn't alone, and when I opened my eyes, the room was pitch black, but I could hear something soft, almost like whispers, coming from somewhere just outside. Story 32. It was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance to get away from the city, from the noise, from everything that had made me feel trapped, suffocated. And so when I found the ad for the old farmhouse just outside of town, I thought it was perfect. It was secluded, cheap, and the kind of quiet I desperately needed to reset my life. So I didn't hesitate to move in, even though the house looked a little run down, with its weathered exterior and sagging porch, the kind of place that would look like it belonged in a horror movie if you were to judge it by its appearance. But I wasn't scared, not then. I was too desperate for a change to care about the way it looked. And the first night, I remember being excited, unpacking my things and setting up in the living room. The house was cold, but I attributed that to the old heating system, and it was late when I finally got into bed, wrapped up in the quiet, almost too quiet. But I shrugged it off, telling myself it was just the silence of being alone for the first time in a while. But that night, I heard something, a faint noise, almost like footsteps from upstairs, and I chalked it up to the house settling. Old houses did that. But then it happened again the next night, and the next. This time it wasn't just footsteps, it was something else, like something was dragging across the floor, and at first, I thought it might have been an animal, something in the walls or attic. But when I checked, there was nothing, no sign of anything. Just the same stillness. But then the whispers started, faint at first, like voices barely above a whisper, coming from the hallway, and I thought it was my imagination playing tricks on me. But the whispers were always there, soft, eerie, calling my name. And no matter where I went in the house, the whispers followed, and I started to feel like I wasn't alone anymore, like there was something else in the house with me, something that wanted my attention, wanted me to hear it. And then came the cold and intense, biting cold that would sweep through the house, colder than any winter night I'd ever experienced. And I remember waking up in the middle of the night, shivering, my breath visible in the air despite the fact that the heat had been on. And when I turned over to check the thermostat, I could see my breath hanging in the air, thick and heavy, and it was then that I realized something was wrong. And the next night, it got worse. I woke up to the sound of the floor creaking beneath me, slow, deliberate, like someone was walking around the bed. And when I sat up, I saw it, standing at the foot of the bed, a figure, dark and shadowy, its face obscured, but I could feel its eyes on me, like it was watching me, waiting for something. And I couldn't move, couldn't scream. I just sat there frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone. But the air in the room was thick, suffocating. And when I tried to get out of bed, I couldn't move, like something was holding me down, pressing me into the mattress. And I panicked, struggling. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get free. And the longer I fought, the tighter the pressure became. And just as I thought I was going to suffocate, the pressure lifted, and I was able to move again. But when I looked around the room, the figure was gone, and I thought maybe I had just imagined it. But the whispers kept getting louder, more insistent, always calling my name. And no matter where I went, I could hear them, like they were coming from the walls, from the floors, from the very air itself, and I started to feel like I was losing my mind, like I couldn't trust my own senses, and then it happened again. Only this time it was worse, much worse. I was sitting in the living room, trying to focus on a book, when I heard the scratching, like claws dragging along the wood floor, and I stood up, expecting to find a rat or something else, but when I looked, there was nothing, and then it came again, closer this time, and I followed the sound, my heart racing, until I reached the basement door, and I just knew, that whatever was in this house, it was down there. So without thinking, I opened the door. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and I could hear something moving around below, something huge, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as I slowly descended the stairs, the light flickering above me, casting strange shadows that seemed to move on their own. And when I reached the bottom, I saw it, standing in the corner of the basement, a shape, a figure, its face a twisted mass of shadows and eyes, hundreds of eyes staring at me, and I froze, unable to breathe, unable to move. And it spoke, its voice not a voice, but a presence, a feeling that invaded my mind, and it said, "You shouldn't have come here." And before I could respond, it lunged at me, and everything went black. And when I woke up, I was back in my bed, but the house felt different, colder, darker, and when I tried to leave, I found that I couldn't. The door was locked, and the windows were sealed shut, and the whispers were louder than ever, and that's when I realized the truth, that I was trapped. Trapped in this house, with whatever it was that had been waiting for me, and I couldn't escape, no matter how hard I tried, no matter how far I ran. I would always be drawn back here, back to the thing that was watching me, waiting for me to slip up, to give in to the madness that it had created. And I don't know how long I've been here. Time doesn't seem to matter anymore, but I know this much. I will never leave, because whatever is in this house, it doesn't let you go, not alive, not sane. And the whispers, they're always there, just on the edge of my hearing, and I know, deep down, that it's only a matter of time before I become just another part of the house, just another lost soul trapped within its walls, waiting for the next poor fool to come along to take my place. And I will never escape, because the house has claimed me, and it will never let me go. Story 33. I never believed in ghosts, or at least, I didn't think they could exist until the day I moved into the old house on Crestwood Avenue, an ancient structure that had been abandoned for years, left to rot with peeling paint, sagging floors, and windows so filthy that the sun barely managed to get through. And I didn't care, because I was desperate, recently divorced, broke, and looking for a fresh start away from the city. So when I saw the rent was cheap and the house seemed like it had potential despite its disrepair, I jumped at the chance without even thinking about it. But from the first night, something felt off. The air in the house was thick, heavy, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. And I remember how everything felt unnaturally still, like the house was waiting for something. But I dismissed it, telling myself it was just my mind playing tricks because of how empty and quiet the place was. So I settled in, began unpacking my things, and even though I could hear the occasional creak of the floorboards, the house had a strange charm that grew on me. That is, until the first night I stayed in the master bedroom, when I woke up suddenly, my body drenched in sweat, heart racing, because I thought I heard someone whispering my name, softly, so softly that I couldn't make out the words, but I swear it was there. And when I looked around the room, the shadows seemed to move, shifting in ways they shouldn't have, and I thought it was just the wind, or maybe an old house settling. But the whispers continued, only now they were louder, clearer, and when I closed my eyes, I could hear them all around me, like 1,000 voices, each one begging me to listen, begging me to acknowledge them. And I tried to ignore it, try to go back to sleep, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape the sound. So I finally got up, turned on the light, and tried to shake off the unease. But the whispers didn't stop, they just seemed to shift locations, coming from the corners of the room, then the closet, then the hallway outside, and by the time I couldn't take it anymore, I was standing in the middle of the hallway, my head spinning, too scared to move, and I realized then that something was wrong, that this house wasn't empty. It was full of something I couldn't understand, and the first real sign of danger came a week later when I was cleaning out the attic, sorting through boxes and old furniture when I stumbled upon something strange, a large wooden box hidden behind a pile of dust-covered sheets, and inside the box, there was a collection of old photographs, most of them faded and worn, but one photo caught my attention. It was a picture of the house, the same one I was living in, but it looked different. It was whole, well kept, and standing in front of the house was a family, a man, a woman, and 2 children. But what struck me was the expression on their faces. All of them were smiling, but their eyes were empty, hollow, as if they weren't alive, as if they had been erased, and I couldn't help but feel a shiver run down my spine. And I put the photo back in the box, telling myself it was just an old family relic, that the people in the photo were long gone. But the house, it kept whispering to me, always in the back of my mind, always just out of reach, until one night when I went to bed feeling more exhausted than usual. So tired I could barely keep my eyes open. And that's when I heard it again, the whispering. But this time it wasn't just my name. It was clear, it was saying something else. Help us. Over and over. And the whispering grew louder, and I couldn't take it anymore. I got up, grabbed a flashlight, and rushed to the basement, which I had avoided until then because the air down there felt so thick, so cold. But as I descended the stairs, the temperature dropped, and I could feel the weight of the darkness pressing in on me, the kind of darkness that made every part of you want to turn around and run. But I didn't, not this time. And when I reached the bottom, I saw it, a door at the far end of the basement, one I hadn't noticed before, and the whispers, they were coming from behind it. Help us. And I approached the door slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. But when I touched the handle, it felt like the room shifted, like the air itself became denser. And I hesitated for just a moment. But then I turned the handle, and the door creaked open, revealing a room that was even colder than the basement. And the walls were covered in strange symbols, carved into the stone. And in the center of the room was a circle of old, rotting candles, their wax long melted. And as I stepped further into the room, the whispers grew louder until they were almost deafening. And that's when I saw it, something moving in the shadows, something that wasn't human, something twisted and wrong, its eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. And as it stepped forward, its body contorted in unnatural ways, I realized it wasn't just one thing. It was a collection, a mass of bodies, a mass of lost souls that had been trapped here, in this house, for God knows how long. And before I could even react, it lunged at me, its mouth opening wide, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth, and I screamed. But the sound was drowned out by the whispering, the pleading, help us. And then everything went black, and I woke up in my bed, like nothing had happened. But I knew it wasn't over. I knew that whatever I had seen in the basement was still there, waiting, and from that night on, the house became even worse. The whispers grew into screams, the cold became unbearable, and the shadows seemed to move, to follow me, to watch me. And every time I tried to leave, the doors wouldn't open, the windows were sealed shut, and the last time I tried to leave, I could see the faces in the window, staring at me, their eyes empty, hollow. And that's when I realized that I had become a part of this house, that I was never going to escape. And I'm still here, stuck, waiting, because once you step foot in that place, you're trapped, and you can never leave, not until you become one of them, one of the lost souls that whispers in the dark, calling for help that will never come.